The committee of the whole will come to order. I would note that we have Senator Spearman, who is present in the building. We will mark her present when she is here. The rest of the committee of the whole is present. The first item of business on our agenda is to adopt the committee rules. Members of the committee, you will note that the rules for the 35th Special Session Senate Committee of the Whole have been provided to you at your desk. The rules provide that the meeting shall be open to the public and available via live broadcast on the legislative website, that the committee recesses shall be at the call of the chair or to a time certain. We must be provided that a quorum is present and a majority of those present and voting is sufficient to pass a bill or resolution or adopt committee amendments. Members approved by the chair to participate remotely are present and in attendance at the meeting for all purposes. The chair must present and will decide when a committee takes action or a vote. The secretary shall record motions and votes of the committee members on all votes and other actions. Matters not within the governor's proclamation or not relevant to the specific topic under consideration will be ruled out of order, and any work requested of legislative staff on behalf of the committee must be made through the chair of the committee of the whole. Members, any questions or discussion on the proposed rules for the committee of the whole? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to adopt. I have a motion from Senator Scheibel, seconded by Senator Neal. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously, the members of the committee of the whole. The next thing on our agenda, I would like to turn the microphone over to our legislative counsel and Mr. Powers for general disclosures regarding LCB staff. Mr. Powers, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Kevin Powers, General Counsel, LCB Legal Division. Present with the Committee of the Whole today are members of the Research Division, Fiscal Analysis Division, and Legal Division of the Legislative Counsel Bureau. As a reminder to the public, we are nonpartisan staff. We do not support or oppose any particular policy, viewpoint, or piece of legislation. However, we do provide the Senate and its committees and members with objective legal and fiscal analysis advice and research policy analysts. In order to do that, we provide that on a nonpartisan basis based strictly on the terms of the bill, the terms of the law, and our analysis of the fiscal and policy impact of the legislation. And that's why we're here today, to provide our analysis of the legal and fiscal and policy impacts of this potential legislation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. With that, members of the committee, we have one bill on our agenda. It is Senate Bill number 1. You have also been provided a copy of Senate Bill number 1 on your desks. A copy of Senate Bill 1 is also available online for members of the public who are joining us. We will proceed in the following fashion. We will hear a presentation and a walkthrough of the provisions of Senate Bill 1. We will then move to members of the Committee of the Whole for questions. If you wish to speak as a member of the Committee of the Whole, please hit your request to speak button when the time comes. We will make sure that everyone has a chance to answer the questions before doing another round of questions, but we will let members ask whatever questions you may have. Once we are done with the committee asking questions on Senate Bill number 1, we will move to testimony in support of Senate Bill number 1. We will be limiting testimony in the support and opposition and neutral portions to 2 minutes per person. If you have additional comments past the 2 minutes and we ask you to wrap up, I would ask that you provide the remainder of your testimony in the form of written testimony to the Committee of the Whole, and we will make sure that members get any of those portions of written testimony that are submitted. We will intend to move through a portion of support testimony and then opposition testimony and then neutral testimony between here in Carson City, down in Las Vegas, Grant Sawyer Building, and then via our phone system. We then may come back for another round to do support, opposition, and neutral in an effort to make sure that folks who have joined us are able to testify and give us their support, opposition, or neutral testimony. With that, members of the committee, we are going to open the hearing on Senate Bill number 1. I would invite Mr. Hill to take the podium and present to us, and we will begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Steve Hill. I'm the CEO of the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, and I am also the chairman of the Las Vegas Stadium Authority. I often say I appreciate the opportunity to be before you today, or today. We think that this is a project that can allow Las Vegas as a city, as a sports destination, as the sports and entertainment capital of the world to move forward. If you give us the opportunity to do that, we will work exceptionally hard. I will work exceptionally hard to make sure that you look back on today and feel like it was time well spent. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. There are a number of benefits to bringing Major League Baseball and the A's in a stadium like this to Las Vegas. It provides year-round sports. It provides a counter-cyclical set of events to what we have now. It doubles the number of professional sporting events that we will have in Las Vegas. Very proud of the sports we have now. We are very proud of what those teams and those venues create. But many people working at those venues move from venue to venue in order to have great jobs. This will provide better jobs by having a well-rounded and completely around the calendar set of events for them to work. The marketing value, the spotlight that is on Las Vegas because Major League Baseball and the A's have chosen Las Vegas as their destination of choice. Our response to that matters. It is a fantastic marketing effort, the value of which is certainly not considered in the numbers that you will see today. But the real reason we do these projects, those projects can be sports, they can be what done from an economic development standpoint that all of you have participated in this session and others, are just really two reasons. One is to create great jobs for the citizens of Nevada, and this project does that. Thousands of good jobs will happen because this happens. And the other is to generate more tax revenue to provide services for all of the good work that you do because the stadium happens. You will have more tax revenue to spend on all the services that you need to spend money on because of the stadium, more than if you do not do this project. And those are the real benefits that matter when you go back to talk to your constituents, and that's not just in Las Vegas. This revenue comes from the room tax, where the room tax pays for a part of our K through 12 education, and a big part of it. It pays for transportation projects. All of the different types of revenues, many of which flow to the state's general fund and will be shared throughout the state, are the reason to do this project. We will walk through this project and this presentation today. I'm joined here by Jeremy Aguero. I'm also joined by Yolanda King and Catherine Aker from the A's, who will help with this presentation and talk with you about the community benefit plan. So thank you for being with me today. Our presentation is in 6 sections. There's a project overview that I'll start with, and then I will turn it over to Mr. Aguero for funding structure. I think you all know what the project is by now. It is intended to be a 9-acre site where the Tropicana Hotel currently exists. It is an iconic place to have a baseball stadium. It will be the best place in the United States to take in a game. It will also provide the best experience around a Major League Baseball game any place in the country. The stadium is intended to be a stadium built with a retractable roof, which will take into consideration some of the hot days that we have in the summer, but also provide the benefit of an open-air experience when the weather in Las Vegas is fantastic and the view of that strip cannot be beaten. It will have at least 30,000 seats, and it will cost at least $1.5 billion, at least $1.1 billion of which the A's will invest in their private investment as a part of building this stadium. Got a couple of maps here that show you where this is. I think you know where the corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard is. And then we have a map that shows our professional sports venues. And you can see, and you know this already, this stadium will be a unique facility. It's unique in terms of its size, at 30,000 seats, more than 10 million more than T-Mobile Arena, and certainly 30,000 less than in Allegiant Stadium. So it fits in a niche in Las Vegas. It's also a baseball stadium, so it is obviously different than T-Mobile Arena. It is different than Allegiant. It will, and we'll talk about this a little later, open up possibilities in addition to baseball that can matter and will matter to Las Vegas. Then we have a few renderings. It's a beautiful stadium. It points to the northwest, so it points away from the airport. That is certainly a helpful part of this. And we have obviously a beautiful strip view. The project timeline on page 11 are just a few of the milestones along the way. There will be a lot of work between these milestones. Passed legislation now. Major League Baseball then soon approves the relocation. Design of the project will start immediately, with construction starting probably in late 2024. This stadium will be ready and open for the Major League Baseball stadium or Major League Baseball season in 2028. This stadium is sized to the projected attendance in the stadium. It will be the smallest baseball stadium in Major League Baseball. We are projecting that it will have about 27,500 attendees for each baseball game. And so the stadium is sized for that projected attendance. That projected attendance is about midway through average Major League Baseball stadium attendance throughout the country. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Guerrero.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Jeremy Aguero. I'm also want to echo Mr. Hill's comments about honored to stand before you today. In terms of talking through the funding, the project funding structure itself, I think you've probably heard this from time to time. The overall project is roughly $1.5 billion in total. The A's willing to bring not less than $1.1 billion to invest in the project, and Nevada contributing not more than $380 million in total. On the slide that follows, provide a brief outline. I'm now on page 15 for the packets that have been provided to you. Those have to reflect those two component parts at the top end of that. Obviously, the great deal of our conversation today and around this is the public's portion in terms of contributing to the project. There are really three component parts shown by the lighter blue colored boxes that are shown there. The first of those is the creation of a sports and entertainment district. The second is our transferable tax credits. And then the third is a credit toward development-related activity that be provided by Clark County. In terms of the Sports and Entertainment District itself, the way the Sports and Entertainment District works is that all the revenues that are generated by the project, sales tax, live entertainment tax, payroll taxes, and other taxes will inure to an account. That account will be utilized to then repay bonds, stadium bonds that will be issued by Clark County in order to fund a portion of the project. It is estimated today that those bonds will be roughly $120 million in bonds. In terms of the transferable tax credits, those transferable tax credits are issued by the state through the Stadium Authority Board with the idea that about $180 million of transferable tax credits would be issued, 90 million of which would be subject to repayment through the taxes that are ultimately generated generated by the project. Finally, the third element, the development agreement, would essentially be an offset of the cost of infrastructure that the project is going to be required to pay. As part of the legislation, the project is required to offset any cost of infrastructure, including transportation, utilities, and the like. That's going to come with some cost. The county will offset that to an amount equal to $25 million. In terms of the bonds themselves, the security associated with the bonds is obviously important and has been a subject of a great deal of discussion. 1 year's reserve will be allocated immediately upon the issuance of the bonds. So we'll have a full year's worth of bond payments that will sit in an account the day the bonds are issued. A second year's worth of those reserves will be funded directly out of the cash flow or the waterfall from the bonds themselves. It is expected that that second reserve will be fully funded during the construction period of the project, and that's largely because as part of the bond issuance, there'll be capitalized interest at the front end to ensure that all of the bonds are fully paid. In addition to that, the requirement is that the bonds not be issued with anything less than 2 times coverage. That means for every $1 in principal and interest payments, there needs to be another $1 in revenue that is anticipated for the project. Half of that coverage will come from the cash that's generated by the taxes that are generated from the project. The other half comes from a state line of credit, or what's referred to as the credit enhancement portion of the project. Essentially, the state will set aside 0.5 times coverage in an account. In the event that it's used like a line of credit, those dollars will be utilized and then have to be paid back from the taxes that are generated. The hope is that it's not used very often, if at all, but if it is, those dollars will be available to ensure that the principal and interest of the bonds can be paid overall. The other portion that we talk a lot about is the waterfall itself, right? The dollars that are generated with the project, where do they go? First, they go to principal and interest. That's the first element of the project. Obviously, that's where the dollars need to be generated. The second is to fund the operations of the stadium authority. And then there's a third component that essentially says what happens if the A's fail to meet their obligations. If they fail to meet their obligations, the dollars from the waterfall are then utilized to make sure that the stadium can continue to operate by the Stadium Authority Board. After that, the funds are allocated to the second year reserve during construction until such time as that reserve is 100% funded in terms of average annual debt service for the project. Again, by the time the project is completed, the expectation is that there will be 2 years of reserves fully funded at that point. After that, there's the repayment of any draws. So if the reserves have to be drawn or if the credit enhancement has to be drawn, those have to be paid back. After that, there's an allocation to capital, $5 million a year that has to go toward capital. After that, there's the repayment of the refundable portion of the transferable tax credits. Beyond that, there's an allocation of $5 million for a homeless prevention and assistance fund that would inure to the benefit of Clark County and ultimately be used to provide assistance. And then at the very bottom of the waterfall, should any money make it all the way to the bottom of that waterfall, it can be used for the early defeasance of the bonds, it can be used for infrastructure or capital reinvestment back into the project. Finally, the question often comes up is what happens if the revenues come in under expectations? And this is what's shown on slide 17. If the revenues come in under expectations, the cash coverage is the first thing to be used. Again, for every $1 that is allocated toward principal and interest, there's another 50 cents in expected revenue that would be generated by the project. So that provides the first line of defense to ensure the project has sufficient revenue to make that principal and interest payment. Beyond that, you have the line of credit, the credit enhancement that is set up at 0.5 times. Then you have the first year's reserve, then you have the second year's reserve, and then you have the county, the full faith and credit of the county that is issuing that. I'll talk about this a little later in our presentation today, but this is effectively a 4-year reserve. We would have 4 years of no revenue if the state backstop is 0.5 times, and then you have 2 years worth of reserves, which you could only use half of each period, you'd essentially have to go 4 full years with having 0 revenue before you had to make your way all the way to the county providing any type of its credit to make that happen. In terms of the stadium financing structure itself, it is competitive, if not superior, to what we've seen in other stadiums throughout the United States and their construction. What slide 18 provides is a history going back to 2001. The portion that is funded by the private funding is shown in gray. The portion that is shown in the public funding is shown in the light blue color here. As what's illustrated, the public's portion of the project would be about 25% of its total. Not only is this the largest amount of private investment in any project that's shown on our chart here, as a percentage, it's also the lowest amount of public investment in the project. In addition to that, the next slide, shown on page 19, shows all public stadiums and the distribution between the size of the population and the amount of the public funding that's shown here. What you'll see is that where smaller markets are, the public tends to provide more of the funding toward the project. This is for any number of reasons: the size of the market, the corporate base, the ability to buy suites. This is not the case here. We are, as Mr. Hill indicated, among the smaller markets, matter of fact, the smallest of the markets there from a media element, and also among the lowest in terms of the public contribution. Of course, the differentiating factor for us as a state is the 40 million visitors that come to Las Vegas every year and the ability to leverage that portion of it as well. Mr. Hill talked about and showed you some maps in terms of the project and how it would be structured and some of those type of things. On slide 20, I've tried to provide an illustration of what the project will look like on the footprint and what the sports and entertainment improvement district actually looks like. It is not the entire site of where the Tropicana Hotel stands today. Rather, it is a 9-acre circle where the stadium will be located and, could include some parking or something like that immediately adjacent in what is necessary for that. Importantly, the bill as currently drafted specifically states that it cannot be a hotel or a hotel casino or a licensed gaming operation. The Tropicana Hotel will need to be demolished in order for the project to move forward. It will be constructed on the stadium site that's shown in gray on the slide before you. The balance of that area will not be in the sports and entertainment district, with the expectation that it will be redeveloped in other uses and hopefully generate a substantial amount of economic and fiscal impacts in its own right. In terms of some of the key public considerations, and Madam Chair and members of the committee, I apologize for slide 21. I know it has a lot of words on it, but I felt like these words mattered, and so I included it this way. There's a few sort of key elements that I think are very important from the public's standpoint, from the consideration. And obviously, these are tools we've used for other projects. I think they are equally important here. Number one is that the private sector must put the first money in. The A's are going to be required to contribute the land to the Stadium Authority and fund the first $100 million of project capital costs before any public money goes into the project. The public will also put in the last $50 million of the project, which means that 100% of the private dollars have to be put in first. Second on the bullets here is a non-relocation agreement. What this requires is that the A's also execute a 30-year non-relocation agreement that says if they choose to leave at any point during the next 30 years, they have to pay off any outstanding debt of the state in terms of the bonds, and they have to pay off any of the transferable, refundable portion of the transferable tax credits that are then outstanding. Finally, the conservative nature of the bonding. I know there'll be questions today, and there have been questions throughout relative to some of the underlying assumptions, and I very much look forward to having that dialogue with you or with anyone else. As we do that, I think it's important to understand the process that all of this information went through before it got to you today. The A's developed a model. That model is predicated on information that they receive from Major League Baseball teams all over the country, as well as their own experience. They worked with a company called CSL to develop the assumptions that drive that. CSL is widely recognized as the foremost leader in market analysis for sports teams. I believe they do it for almost everyone around the United States. Those estimates were then reviewed by our firm, Applied Analysis. They were reviewed by Goldman Sachs. Clark County retained PFM to review the estimates on their behalf. All of those firms provided input. There were some modest revisions that were made, but the conclusions are that they are reasonably inconsistent with the best expectations. The bonds that would be issued will be at 2 times coverage with a 2-year reserve. This is sometimes referred to as belt and suspenders relative to that. I'm not going to stand up here and suggest to you that anything is perfect or perfectly secure. Lord knows we've had some ups and downs in our economy and have dealt with a pandemic. But the structure here, I would argue, is as conservative as you will see almost anywhere relative to 2 times coverage, a state backstop, as well as a full 2-year reserves overall. With that, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I will turn it back to Mr. Hill to talk about governance and oversight.
Steve Hill. The Stadium Authority really has the responsibility of making sure that the state gets the benefit of the law that you pass, the deal that you make. We start by doing that with 3 agreements. And we enter into these agreements. We've identified these as the developer partner. These are the terms that are in the law. The Stadium Events Company, and the A's themselves. The development agreement is entered into with the developer partner. It's a very comprehensive document. It does not, though, take the place of the work that the developer partner will have to do with Clark County. They will have to go through a high-impact project process with Clark County that will address many of the infrastructure issues. And there's a list of topics that is listed in the bill itself that is a partial list of what that HIP process with the county will be. But this makes sure that the stadium is built correctly, it is built to the standards that we expect, and the process for going about that construction is followed. Then there's also a lease agreement that will be for at least 30 years. That is entered into with the Stadium Events Company, which are the A's and their partners in operating the stadium. And then, as Jeremy already recognized, there is a non-relocation agreement that the A's enter into with the Stadium Authority that requires them not to leave, but if they do, they have to pay off all the outstanding amounts on the bonds. The Stadium Authority Board itself is a 9-member organization with currently 1 ex officio member, the county treasurer. This bill proposes to add the state treasurer as also an ex officio member of that board. Currently, the governor appoints 3 members to the board. The county commission appoints 3 members to the board. UNLV has a spot on the board to look after their interests in occupying Allegiant Stadium as well. And then that group of 7, taking into consideration currently the recommendation of the Raiders, appoints 2 additional board members. This bill recommends that one of those positions be filled taking into consideration the recommendation of the Raiders, and the other position be appointed taking into the consideration the recommendation of the A's. The Authority Board has a certain set of responsibilities that are outlined in law and would continue. It is a public body. It is subject to the open meeting law, public records request law, everything that applies to a public body. It owns the land in the stadium that is on that land, and it goes through those 3 agreements that we have already identified. There are a number of supporting agreements that support those 3 primary documents. We approve stadium agreement in this bill. The way the bill was the law was written in 2016, different time, different body of here in the legislature. The team was responsible to develop a plan, tell us what the plan was, and follow what is in that plan. We've heard you and have changed that now where this will be an agreement that has to be approved and has more teeth in it than the law did in 2016. You'll hear more about that from Ms. King. We manage the funds that flow through the waterfall. We manage the capital improvement projects, oversee the maintenance of the stadium, make sure that it is maintained at a world-class level. And if there are any disagreements between UNLV and the Raiders, the Stadium Authority is the arbiter of those disagreements. Moving on to other project elements, want to let all know, and I think many have seen this by now, there had been thoughts early on that the Aviators may need to move out of Las Vegas if a major league team comes. That is not the case. The Aviators will remain in Las Vegas. In fact, there's real synergy. The Aviators are the minor league AAA team, the feeder team to the A's. And so having those players near to the major league team is great. It's great for the fans. You'll be able to follow your favorite players at the Aviators up into the major leagues. With that, I'd just like to take the opportunity to introduce Ms. King and Ms. Aker. I think you'll find that we appreciate very much the input that you and many others have provided. We think what they have to say is very responsive to that. I want to welcome you today. Thank you for being here, and podium is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I am Yolanda King, and for some time now, I wanted to express to you that the A's have been meeting with various public officials, as well as different organizations throughout the community, as well as the community, and trying to understand what the needs are of the community. I, too, have met with most legislators in the building to also gain an understanding of what you feel are the necessary community needs in a community benefits agreement. For the most part, what I've been describing to most of you is what is the intent or the purpose of a community benefits plan, and also providing to you some examples of components that have been included in various community benefits plans across the country, just to give you an idea of what are some of the components that can be included in the community benefits plan. So in meeting with you over probably the last 3 months or so, some of the components that I've heard from you in which you feel that would be important to a community benefits agreement. First and foremost, we have talked about workforce diversity, and what that would include is establishing minimum goals for construction work that would be provided by targeted groups, which would include minorities, female, and disabled workers. Another added component that I heard from you and what you felt would be important would also be the stadium operations and the workforce, the diverse workforce that would be included as part of the operations of the stadium. Again, that would include a minimum percentage of the workforce hours that would be performed by minority, females, and disabled workers. For subcontracting and vendor diversity, that too was also a high priority that was expressed by your members. Again, focuses on diversity for minority, for women, for veterans, as well as disabled individuals. A livable wage in establishing a minimum requirement would be a livable wage. And in addition to that, we talked about many of the infrastructure needs that would occur probably as a result, one being to mitigate some of the the impacts of the stadium being in the area that it's in. We talked about addressing some of the infrastructure needs with regard to traffic. And in addition to that, some infrastructure needs in the community, as well as obviously across the state of Nevada with regard to renovating or building new softball or baseball fields, again, across the state of Nevada. Community engagement was also a factor in what you felt was an important need in the community. And some of those community engagement factors included team participation in educational programs. It included ticket donations to students and families, and this would be throughout the state of Nevada. There's uniform distribution to Little Leagues, again, throughout the state of Nevada. Player participation in educational programs, as well as the ability to develop an arts plan for the stadium. Educational programs with colleges and universities with regard to internships or scholarships. And then the major part that I heard from most of your members included some accountability. So the accountability piece would be, there's been discussion about designating a community monitor, if you will, that would be responsible for implementing as well as making sure that the agreement, that the team is in compliance with the agreement. And one thing I want to make clear, in this plan, we keep talking about a plan, but the ultimate goal, and as also what's cited in the legislation, is that this will be a binding agreement between the stadium authority and the team. So ultimately, it ends up being an agreement, which we hope will include most of all the things that are listed here. And then lastly, one of the items that was also mentioned on several occasions with regard to accountability is the enforcement piece. And how do we enforce the things through that community benefits agreement and making sure that the team is complying with that. And again, it ends up being a binding agreement. So the components that I have noted for you and that I've heard from the community members do align with what the team currently provides in their community today. And I have Catherine Aker here. She will provide some overview of what that looks like, and also probably some commitments that we have from the team at a minimum of what the commitment will be with regard to a community benefits agreement. I'll turn it over to Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Aker, Vice President of Marketing, Communications, and Community for the A's, and I'm pleased to be here today. As Ms. King mentioned, I have been in the community for the last couple of months on a listening tour to make sure I understand and our overall team understands the work that we can do and the type of commitment that we can make. And that listening tour will continue to move forward over the next couple months and years to make sure that we are really supporting the most critical areas in each one of your communities. As Ms. King also said, the number of things that have been included in the CBA is part of those conversations that we have had as a team, as well as the work that she has done. And to highlight again some of that engagement that we are committed to doing include fundraising and grants to local nonprofits throughout the state of Nevada, and that will be minimum funding contribution equal to 1% of our ticket sales. We are also committed to ticket donations, so the complimentary tickets to nonprofits and families, in addition to a community suite for every single game. We also have education initiatives currently, and we plan to hopefully bring those to Nevada as well in K-12 schools. Currently, we're in 800 classrooms throughout Northern California, and we hope to be able to implement literacy and STEM-related work like we do there in the state of Nevada. We also have internships and scholarship programs that we plan to also hopefully do in Nevada. As I've mentioned, most of this work we are currently doing, and we're excited to bring them to your state. Thank you.
Obviously, the location of the stadium brings transportation consideration and concerns. It is a very high-trafficked area. It is an iconic intersection in Las Vegas. Many venues around it. I'll start by saying and repeating that the high-impact project process with Clark County will be followed. The A's in the county will have a conversation around what infrastructure is necessary, who will fund that infrastructure in order to mitigate the issues around having a stadium in the area. It is the ballpark that will be the most walkable ballpark in the United States. Tens of thousands, hotel rooms within walking distance of this park. We anticipate that a third or so of the attendees at events at this stadium will walk to the stadium. There's much work going on Tropicana, the I-15 intersection now. There is anticipated work that will happen on the east side of the project on Tropicana near UNLV and the entrance to the airport. Those added projects and capacity because of those projects will be exceptionally helpful. Reno Road runs behind the Tropicana to the south and to the east. It allows that property to be accessed from 3 different directions so that you do not have to drive through the intersection at Tropicana on Las Vegas Boulevard. So you can come from the south, you can come from the east, and you can come from the north down Koval to Reno. And Kimley Horn, who is really the traffic engineer in Las Vegas, has done a study, looked at what upgrades would be necessary and beneficial on Reno, and those I'm sure will be implemented. The stadium will also implement park and rides through RTC, much like we do at the Knights game now. And this will be the first stadium that is built in the era of the Boring Company loop. That will connect the stadium underground with an entire system that will not interfere with the traffic that is at grade currently. Moving on to events, mentioned this previously, but bringing a baseball stadium to Las Vegas brings a venue of a different size, and it also attracts a unique set of events. The LVCVA is really functions as the sports authority in Las Vegas as well. We are involved in bringing many of the major events to Las Vegas. We have a team of people who do that, do a fantastic job of it, have grown that in Las Vegas over the past number of years. They keep a list of organizations and events that want to come to Las Vegas that either we don't have dates for, we don't have a venue for. And in particular, I'll point out that when we passed this law in 2016 and closed Sam Boyd Stadium, we anticipated that the dozen or so events that were held at Sam Boyd that were not UNLV football games would migrate over to Allegiant Stadium. That has not happened. The cost of operating Allegiant Stadium or the size of the facility has not allowed those events to move there. They want to come back to Las Vegas. Right now, they do not have a venue to do that. As we look at the number of events that have been projected in the stadium, obviously the 82 baseball games are going to be played. That is something we certainly could not do without this stadium now. And as I said earlier, that will double the number of professional sport events in Las Vegas every year. It will take us to about 155 regular season professional sporting events every year. We'll have that offering about every other night throughout our year. That's if our teams don't make the playoffs. If they make the playoffs, that will obviously add events. But as we at the LVCVA looked at the events that want to come to Vegas and would fit in this stadium and currently don't have a place to go, we've shown you just some of what those events could be. This projection, the numbers that Jeremy will talk about here in just a few minutes, only project 8 additional events that are not community events that are ticketed. 5 are concerts and only 3 are sporting events. I'm confident that that is a very conservative number. With that, I will turn it back over to Mr. Aguero to talk about the impacts from the stadium.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, again for the record, my name is Jeremy Aguero. The first of the impact assessment slides that's in front of you deals specifically with this issue of visitation. When we talk about impact, we generally break it into three categories. One is economic impact, the second is fiscal impact, and the third is social impact, much of which you've talked about here today. From our perspective, in terms of measuring some of that, there are sort of three elements as well of the project that generate those type of benefits. One of them is the construction-related activity. The second is the operations of not only the stadium, but also the events that occur just because the team exists. And then the third are visitor-related activities. When we think about that, obviously, so much of the activity that goes in to what the stadium does is predicated on the number of people that attend events. That estimate is about 2.6 million attendees every year. As Mr. Hill said, about 95 ticketed events, and then a number of tours and private events that will obviously take place at the facility. We went through the exercise of trying to estimate how many of those folks will come from out of town that will attend those games. We have wonderful information from Allegiant Stadium. We have information in terms of activity that's happening at other venues like T-Mobile Arena in terms of those total volumes. We were able to get information also from other Major League Baseball teams around the country. Las Vegas is different than these areas. Our ability to attract those visitors is predicated on the fact that we have 150,000 hotel rooms in the market. Right? We have a Harry Reid International Airport, which generates a great deal of traffic, particularly for a population base of our size, and about 250,000 leisure and hospitality workers that their full-time job is to provide services to folks that come and visit every year. Based on all of that information, as well as survey-related data of about 15,000 people that were surveyed, both in market and out of market, we estimate that a little less than 30% of the attendees of every event will be from out of town. Now, in terms of measuring economic and fiscal impact, we do not include all of these folks. As a matter of fact, we discount that based on incremental visitation. That number is the 405,000 that you've probably read about and you're looking up at on the screen today. It represents roughly 16% of all the attendees in any year-round within the event, and as Mr. Hill said, probably somewhat conservative relative to that number. But it's also a number that we believe is justifiable, certainly defensible in terms of incremental visitation. I do want to be clear here. What incremental visitation is intended to mean is these are folks who have said, but for the baseball game, but for the special event that would occur at the stadium, they would not have decided to get on a plane or get in a car and come and visit Las Vegas. Those incremental visitors are what we're measuring in terms of economic impact. Those incremental visitors are what we are measuring in terms of fiscal impact overall. When we look at the economic impacts, I'm now on page 37, we break them into the three major categories that I mentioned before. The first is construction-related activity, the second is operation-related activity, and the third is those incremental visitors. The project itself is expected to cost about $1.5 billion. If that goes over in terms of that cost, it's 100% the responsibility of the A's, but it continues to generate economic activity. Because construction activity is not recurring by its very nature, we measure it differently than we measure other types of activity. We measure it based on person years of employment. So what you're seeing here is about 14,600 person years of employment, or one person employed for 1 year. The project is expected to last for about 3 years, so you can think about what those impacts would be. What is shown here are the direct impacts, the people that get a paycheck directly for constructing the project, as well as indirect impacts. Those are all the suppliers that provide concrete or security or steel to the project. And then the third is the induced impacts. As these construction workers go back to their neighborhoods, they spend money at doctors' offices and grocery stores and movie theaters, generating and supporting other jobs. In total, we have modeled about $1.2 billion worth of activity that's generating economic impact. Some of it, of course, will be out of state. We believe about half of that will be in labor as opposed to materials that are generating mitigating those economic impacts overall. We utilize the statewide average in terms of wage and salaries for construction and development employees, about $66,000 per employee to essentially augment that number into the total number of jobs. I will tell you, I think that that wage and salary will be higher because when that estimate was done, there was not an agreement with the Building and Trades Union that will obviously push that value up, probably closer to about $79,000 per employee, and could potentially bring some of the labor down slightly. As you see here, the total amount of direct, indirect, and induced wages and salaries are estimated to be about $890 million in total. About half of that would be direct employment and direct wages and salaries. And the economic impact, again, the project is estimated to be $1.5 billion, including the ripple effect, about $2.1 billion overall. In terms of the operations of the stadium, again, we're talking about the operations of the stadium itself as well as the team itself, as an estimated economic impact, direct, indirect, and induced, of about 8,000 jobs overall. I'm not here to suggest to you that these are all full-time jobs. They are not. Many of these jobs are part-time, and so it includes both full-time and part-time employment associated with the project. About $440 million worth of wages and salaries, and an estimated economic impact, including direct economic activity as well as indirect economic activity, of about $1.3 billion a year. The third component part are those visitors. And again, now we're only talking about the 16% of visitors that will be 16% of attendees that will be at individual events that would not have come to Las Vegas otherwise. The estimated expenditure for those folks is about $571 million in our state. That generates a substantial amount of economic activity overall. Wages and salaries, again, not in terms of indirects and induced, about $326 million in total and $900 million of aggregate economic impact. The same three, if we flip to the next page 38, the same three estimates we utilize in terms of the verticals, if you will, for the fiscal implications associated with the project. The construction of the project will generate retail sales and use tax, as retail sales and use are, as construction materials are subject to retail sales and use tax in the state of Nevada, and they'll have substantial labor impacts, be subject to payroll tax. Obviously, they will generate other revenues, which would also generate additional yield, but are not reflected here. In terms of the annual operations, what has been estimated is sales tax, modified business tax, live entertainment tax, and commerce tax, generating about $17 million. The project will be owned by the Stadium Authority Board, be owned by the public, and will not be subject to property tax on the real side, but on the personal side it will be. In terms of the incremental visitation element, again, visitors are remarkable for us as a state. They pay room tax, gaming tax, live entertainment tax, retail sales and use tax, and pretty much every other tax that we impose in the state of Nevada, and are estimated to generate about $36.5 million overall. When we look at the entire streams of these revenues, the total yield associated with the project is anticipated to generate about $3 for every one that is required to make the repayment of the bonds and offset the costs associated with the project. As Mr. Hill indicated, because of the visitor element, which is not captured in terms of any in the sports and entertainment district or in any type of the repayment, because of that incremental visitation, we get this additional yield that other communities simply can't provide, ensuring that the project not only is fiscally responsible in terms of its structure, but also generates a net positive economic and fiscal benefit overall. In terms of the tax revenues, on the next page 39, in terms of the tax revenues that are contemplated, the idea is to capture as many of the revenues as can be captured in a commercially reasonable way to do so on the project. I've listed a number of them here. Some of them have been modeled. Other ones, like franchise fees, we simply don't have enough information to model today. The idea is hopefully to be able to get some additional yield from revenue sources resources that are simply not readily, cannot be readily estimated because of where the project is in its state, but that would ultimately generate some additional revenue for the project, some additional security for the bonds that are ultimately issued. With that, Madam Chair, members of the committee, that's the end of our prepared remarks. Madam Chair, if it would please you and the committee, I'm happy to go through the provisions of the bill section by section, if that's appropriate, whatever you'd prefer.
Thank you, Mr. Aguero, Mr. Hill. We appreciate you being here to present to us. I don't know that we need to necessarily go section by section through the bill. Members have obviously had a chance to take a look at this bill. I think what we would probably be better served by is moving on to questions from members of the committee. So members of the committee, if you have questions, please hit your request to speak buttons, and we will go on through, and we will begin with Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. Thank you, sir, for the presentation. Just curious about, during the presentation, there was a mention that the average life for this obligation is for 30 years. What's the average life of a baseball stadium? How long do teams stay in one community?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Madam Chair, is it appropriate just to respond directly?
You may go straight to the member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The answer to your question is there isn't a specific answer. We have baseball stadiums and teams that have existed for a very, very long time. Obviously, the Oakland A's have had a number of homes, beginning in Philadelphia as one of the original American League baseball teams. Obviously, Senator, assets are built to a greater standard today than they were in years past. And so we certainly believe that the term would be 30 years is not unreasonable. In addition to that, there's a non-relocation agreement in this particular case. And so two things to sort of mention. One, the bill as currently drafted requires not only that the facility is built to a first-class premier standard among the best, if not the best, of any Major League Baseball stadium, it also requires that the team commit to maintain that standard throughout the life of the facility. So the hope is that there's sufficient capital allocation that, frankly, the A's will be responsible for, combined with the fact that a non-relocation agreement would ensure that the term of the financing and the term of the commitment are equal.
Thank you for that, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I won't ask any more, although I have many. I did ask a lot in the first hearing of this thing, so I'm good. Thank you.
Next, we have Senator Wynn.
Thank you. I want to get this correct. You've all called us in here for a special session and are asking minimally for the state to give you all $36 million per year for the next 5 years for a taxpayer-funded stadium at the same time that the governor has vetoed funding for summer school, a bill to support children's mental health, a bill requiring paid family leave, all because the governor said we couldn't afford them. Can you explain to me why we need to provide hundreds of millions of dollars for a billionaire team to come to the Las Vegas Strip on some of the most valuable property in the world if we can't provide funding for critical resources like summer school and healthcare? And to follow up on that, I guess my specific question is can you explain to me why this is such a good deal that we should agree that no taxes generated on the corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Tropicana should go to these critical state and local services for the next 30 years?
Senator Steve Hill, we don't really have standing to talk about some of the questions that you asked that are outside of this. The reason that we are asking for this proposal are really those two that I talked about at the beginning. Opportunity for the state to help create thousands of good-paying jobs. And we know that the state will have more money to provide for the services that you mentioned if you do the deal than if you don't.
May I follow up, Chair? I guess then going back to the area, the the idea that for the next 30 years, within this district, located in this prime, like, real estate, we won't be able to generate taxes for those things. Do you think that the money that are created by the jobs are going to outweigh the potential that we are missing out on this area that will never leave that entertainment or that sports district?
Senator Nguyen, Steve Hill. Yes, we do. We think that the tax generation because of this stadium will be 3 times what that investment is. And also, it's a 36-acre site. This is only 9 acres of that. It will make that site, the other 27 acres, more valuable, more likely to be redeveloped. And we think that will also, and that is not in these numbers, we think that will also add to the benefit that the entire state sees.
And I have one more question, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you. Sorry if you feel my frustration. It is because I'm incredibly frustrated. When we first heard this bill in the joint money committees, we expressed concerns about the community benefits. And this might be a question for Ms. King, or this might be a question you would be able to answer. After that hearing, lobbyist after lobbyist after lobbyist came and told us and said they heard our concerns. They were working on our concerns, specifically a community benefits agreement advisory board. We are now 10 days removed from that hearing in a second special session that has forced taxpayers to spend another $250,000 a day to keep us here, and yet what is before us today is the same exact bill that we heard 10 days ago. To say I'm extremely disappointed that no work has been done on this bill over the past 10 days is an understatement, and I appreciate Ms. King's list, but can you explain what your statutory commitment is to address these concerns in this legislative body? Because we are literally looking at the same bill that was presented. And I'm assuming I'm not the only legislator in this building that expressed concerns about the lack of commitment in statute to some of these community benefits. And to say that I'm disappointed that I had a list of like 6 or 10 things that was read to me today that's not included in this new language is a lot. So if you can kind of address some of that lack of incorporation of the feedback that you heard from this legislature.
Senator Nguyen, Steve Hill. The commitment that you've heard today is real. We did mention at our last hearing that we felt like the specifics of that agreement put in legislation would be potentially problematic. It may cause programs to be locked in when the community changes, the needs change. Obviously, the legislation and what is in it is the decision of this body and not ours. So we're
Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had a question from the bill. It's on page 19, and it's lines 9 through 11, and it's related to Chapter 377D. And so my question here is, this is an education, I would say it's a tax that the legislature allowed to be passed in 2019, and I'm trying to understand how much revenue from this particular source is going to be pledged for this stadium, and then I have a follow-up.
Senator Neal, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I'm happy to get you sort of the breakdown at the individual tax revenue standpoint. I'm happy to get that over to you. I don't have that specific number here today, but it would be 100% of that revenue within that district.
Thank you for that. So, Madam Chair, follow-up? So my follow-up is because in Chapter 377D, this happened to be language that we gave to the county, and it was under a bill that we passed in 2019, which was AB 309, which allowed the county to do we allowed them to do a rate, but what they ended up approving was an eighth, I think it was like an 1/8 cent of, but the provisions in this particular chapter under 377D, the county set aside this rate to pay for early childhood education, adult childhood education, truancy, and homelessness. So if 100% of that revenue in 377D is going to be pledged, then what is left for those services that the legislature gave them the legislative power to, I guess, produce for the county?
Senator Neal, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The vast majority of the revenue that would be generated by that specific tax, of course, would still inure to the benefit of all the programs that you just alluded to. The only portion of the tax that would be redirected is money that is not collected today and would only be collected if the stadium itself was constructed. So there would be no loss of any revenue that is currently directed to any of those programs. In addition to that, about 23% of all of our taxable retail sales are generated as a result of visitor expenditures in Southern Nevada. The increase in visitation and the taxable retail sales that are generated as a result, should the stadium be constructed, ought to more than offset those values. So for all of the programs that you just alluded to, if the projections are met as expected, would have more money, not less money, as a result of the project.
Thank you for that. Madam Chair, follow-up? So I guess the question before I go to one more question is, when would we expect to see, after the construction, revenue generated that would, I guess, sustain that particular provision or that fund?
Senator Neal, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I would expect it to be almost immediate after the project is open. There tends to be a bit of a period of excitement when a new facility is opened up, and that generally tends to have even higher estimates than what may be sustained over a longer period of time. The combination of the new schedule for Major League Baseball, having a new stadium, and frankly having it be located on the facility where it is, I would have an expectation that the very first year we would likely probably beat the visitor projections, and then they'll average out throughout the life of the project.
Okay, thank you for that. And then one more question, and then I'll yield to whoever. Madam Chair, so this question is coming from page 23, line 30. And this has to do with the debt service that has been established through the treasurer. And I don't know if you guys can answer this, but I think, I don't know if you guys have been watching the wonderful period of time that we have been in this building. Special session yesterday, today, and then probably even sine die before, where there were all kinds of conversations about prudent behavior, fiscally prudent behavior, and acting appropriately within the confines of the money that we have. This particular line gives legislative power to the treasurer to basically touch the unreserved fund balance of the general fund of the state if something goes wrong. It stuck out to me, number one, because it's a legislative power that basically this bill would then transfer to another person, such as the treasurer. Do you guys have any thoughts or concerns about this particular power shift in this bill? It's probably not appropriate for you to answer, Mr. Aguero.
Senator Neal, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Again, you're right. I don't have standing to talk about power shifts or something along those lines. That provision is designed, along with a number of other provisions, to ensure that there's sufficient security in the event that something isn't there. It's also among a list of, requesting an appropriation from this body. So I think the structure is worked. We've worked with bond counsel to make sure that something was crafted that would meet all of the requirements. Beyond that, Senator, I don't have any other comment.
Yeah. I figured that, so I guess this would be more commentary. I have a problem with, number one, the legislature being put on the hook for $25 million, and then on top of that, being then put on the hook to allow someone other than the legislature to touch the unreserved general fund balance of this state in order to secure a stadium for someone who I believe can afford to pay for it themselves. And so I'll leave it there, and then I'm sure members in the committee have other questions, but I have other tax questions later.
Next, we'll go to Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader, and thank you for the presentation. I think the focus of my questions will probably be more directed to our Director of Community Benefits, and if she could join us. I want to step back just to kind of get the 1,000-foot view when we're talking about community benefits. So let me start off with this. I don't know a lot about baseball, and I know we have an A's representative. So let me start the question here. How long, what's the average negotiation to transfer a player? Let's say the A's want a player tomorrow. I'm just trying to understand how much time would you invest in doing that? Does anybody have the answer to that question? How those negotiations work? Just for one player.
I'm familiar with how the negotiations of a player.
No, and I don't know if our A's representative knows.
Senator, I have a little
The
bit of
reason-
knowledge along those lines. I'm not the general manager of a baseball team, but so typically a player will sign a contract for a period of time. At the end of that period of time, the contract expires, they become a free agent. They can look at all teams and determine where they would like to play and negotiate with them. While the player is under contract, the player could be traded, but is under contract to play for the team.
Well, would it be fair for me to say that it probably takes months for that negotiation? Weeks, days? I'm just trying to understand it. Here's where I'm at. When did we start talking about potentially hosting this team here in Las Vegas? When was the first time that thought ignited? Do we know? When did that conversation start?
Senator Steve Hill. I would say the conversation started in earnest in early February.
Early February of this year. So in early February of this year is when we first have that idea. And then 10 days ago is when we have an opportunity to see some language and have some type of conversation. And it is my suggestion that I believe, in having had an opportunity just to do some basic research, that at times we've invested a significant amount of time, much longer than several months, in just the conversations about transferring a player. And we're talking about transferring a whole team and utilizing Nevadans' money to do that. And we've been here for about 10 days in trying to see that language. So it's concerning to me that at times we could say that a conversation for one player had more time invested, more vetting than this possibility. So that is a concern. But I want to go to Section 24 of the Community Benefits Program as I started off the conversation. And Ms. King, I know we mentioned a little bit about what we're hoping to do and spoke broadly about that. What I'm curious about is what did those community benefit programs look like in other states? So let's start off with Oakland. Do we have firm numbers? How much money was invested into the community? How many schools did we work with? How many workforce development programs existed? How much did we invest into technology? How did we work with the community, infrastructure, boys and girls? I'm just trying to understand, here's where we're starting off at. Here's everything we did in Oakland. And so that we can get a comparison to from what we've done before, because that's the track record, to the new partnership we're forming with Nevada.
Senator Yolanda King, for the record, I'm going to ask Ms. Aker to come up and exactly what they're doing in the community.
Please, thank you.
Catherine Aker with the A's. Yes, so at a high level, some of the work that we have done. So We annually work with 1,600 nonprofit organizations throughout Northern California, and that includes financial donations, so that's everything from grants or gifts, cash gifts to them. We do complimentary tickets, we do in-kind donations, so we average about 1,600 organizations we work with on an annual basis. Our grants right now are about $1.1 to $1.3 million, and all of the money, we have a nonprofit, our community fund is our our charitable arm, and all of the money that comes in goes out. So all of the expenses to our charitable fund are covered by the A's. So we try to break even. All of the money that comes in, we go out through our programs as well as our gifts. We have approximately 56 Little Leagues that we are working with throughout Northern California right now. That's 21,000 youth participate in our youth baseball and softball programs. That's everything from uniforms to coaching clinics to player clinics, free tickets, coming out to the games, scholarship programs, and things like that. As I mentioned earlier, 800 classrooms participate in our literacy and math programs. This year alone, we did over $1 million pages were read through our literacy programs. We also have a number of our players that participate, so they support our initiatives and volunteer, as well as our player-run initiatives in the community. We have given about $1 million annually to food insecurity, to the food bank as well. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. I apologize, because it's not $1 million annually. It's $1.1 million worth of food to local food banks. We've volunteered over the last probably decade about 20,000 hours in the community, and overall about 250,000 youth have participated in our programs.
Thank you for that. And Madam Chair, I apologize that I'm taking up so much time. And I would appreciate, and I think this body would appreciate, and I think Nevadans in general would appreciate, if that's your starting point, if that's what you're doing already, I think that's something we can put into the NRS. Guaranteed 1.1 million in food banks, guaranteed 1.1 million in grants, guaranteed 20,000 human hours in this, guaranteed 15, because that's what you're doing already. And it lays a foundation for a relationship that's going to start where you are now, and it's not forcing your hand to do so much more, but it shows that good faith relationship. And it doesn't tie your hand to the evolving needs of the community, because unfortunately food insecurity is something we're gonna have, and we're not saying which food bank. Community service is something we're always going to have to do, and it doesn't say specifically which community organization we have to do it with. I mean, we're putting into the NRS very specific things that we're obligated to do, and we also just had a presentation with all these projections and these very specific numbers of how many jobs we think we're going to create. I think on the other side of it, we can say that publicly, because I think when we talk about the community benefits program, we speak about it and we tippy-toe and we're so cautious. And you have in this room individuals who went through a negotiation on Allegiant Stadium. We did it through a special session. But I'll tell you, there was one year of humans having conversations individually with legislators at coffee shops. It was 1 year of individuals having conversations individually or in groups with different folk, different perspectives. And even with that 1 year, I'll tell you, the community benefits program that was promised was not delivered. So we are incredibly hesitant, not because of who the partners you are or because of what you're presenting. It has nothing to do with you. It's just that you have folk that were in this room and were promised a lot of things. And the community benefits program sounded great, but very little of it was actually delivered. So when you hear from us pushing back and saying we would love to see some of this in the NRS, it's not because we're suggesting that we don't trust the good faith efforts and we don't trust that we're going to have a great partnership. And that unfortunately some of us are just remembering what just happened a few years ago. And so for us, it's so important that if we have a partner coming into the community and that we invest all of this, all these resources, and that we do it in such an amazing way that I think we could have an incredible relationship, that we ask just for a little bit more buy-in, extending our hand with a firm foundation of commitments in this actual bill that extend beyond just saying community benefit program. And I think we can do it. You're already doing amazing work, and I am not minimizing what you're doing in Oakland, but I think if we can start there and put that in the NRS, it would start giving us, some of us, some comfort. And Madam Chair, my only last question, I would appreciate, not question, Madam Chair, more of a request. I would appreciate an opportunity for an actual continued conversation. And if we're not going to touch the NRS and we're not going to touch any of this, that an actual conversation, whether it be a press conference or a written commitment, where you lay out specific obligations that you've already said you're going to abide by for UNLV, for CSN, for certain nonprofits. Again, because that also allows us to hold you accountable in a relationship way, right? Because we want to hold each other accountable. You're asking a lot from the state. We will be held accountable too, but that we do it through something in writing formally, where the public will remind you years down the road, remember we shook hands on this. And I think that's how this partnership just becomes a little bit more solidified, because we didn't have an opportunity to do it. You know, some of us are having conversations for the first time about this today. So I just, you know, I would appreciate that, and I thank you for being here.
Next is Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Chair Cannizzaro. I want to talk a little bit about the funding structure. And, you know, I've sat in this body for, you know, this is my, I guess it's not my third session. It's my fourth special session, whatever we're at. I've been here for 6 years. I don't sit on the money committee, so I am coming to this with a little bit different perspective, and I know that my constituents are concerned about the financial impact and the financial structure of this deal, and I think it is very difficult to understand for the average person. I am struggling to understand it, so I was hoping that you could look at Section 7 with me of the bill, and I'll read it out loud for everybody's benefit. It defines bonds, means one or more series of general obligation bonds additionally secured by pledged revenues authorized to be issued by the county pursuant to subsection 2 of section 34 of this act and the local government securities law, and any general obligation bonds additionally secured by pledged revenues issued to refund all or a portion of such bonds issued pursuant to section 2 of section 34 of this act and the local government securities law. Can you explain that to us in terms that regular people understand?
Senator Scheibel, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I'll try to. The state of Nevada, and it's both its state and local governments, issues bonds all the time. It essentially takes a revenue stream that we have today and essentially utilizes that revenue stream to bring dollars forward in order to be able to build a building or build a school. I guess a school is a building, or do other things that we might require for debt. Not unlike when my family purchased a home, for example. You have revenues that are set aside to pay for the principal and interest, and then you have other revenues that are generated. Essentially, those revenues that are set aside to pay that principal and interest go to repay bonds that are issued. In this particular case, those bonds are estimated to be about $120 million. So that is this debt that's going to be created, issued by Clark County. We then have revenues that are generated by the project. Those are like the income we just talked about that are going to be dedicated and set aside into an account. They'll be utilized to make payments on those bonds over time. There are specific requirements in the definition that you just read. You've got the idea of a bond. That's that debt instrument that goes out. There's also other terminology that's included in there, this idea of being able to refund a bond, for example. Imagine for that if, much like my home, if the interest rate goes down, sometimes I want to refinance that debt, right? I can't take on more debt, but what I can do is to get the advantage of a lower interest rate, for example. That simply preserves the opportunity for the county to come in and say, hey, look, interest rates have dropped. Let's reduce the amount of interest that we're paying and continue to pay the project over the same term of the debt that would exist. You also see that there are specific laws that are included, that are referenced there. There are laws that draw the foundation in terms of what the state can do and local governments can do in terms of the issuance of that debt. We have to follow those. You will also find in the document that there are some provisions that you're excluding it from, right? Things like the total amount of debt that's taken out by a local government. This doesn't count against it because it's considered a special obligation for purposes of that. It does sound complicated, and oftentimes laws do that, at least for me. They have a tendency to feel somewhat complicated, but it is debt that is essentially secured by revenues, and those bonds are ultimately issued by Clark County, and with all of the reserves and the coverage that we've talked about throughout the presentation.
May I follow up? Okay, so those bonds that are being issued by Clark County are coming from Clark County's general fund, for lack of a better term, correct?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, no, they're not. Those bonds are secured by revenues that will be created by the project. Those include sales tax or live entertainment taxes. Those are dollars that would otherwise go to accounts like that, but they are not revenues that exist today, and there are no monies that are going to be coming out of the county's general fund for the repayment of those bonds. Now, obviously, I have to put a little asterisk next to that because they are general obligation bonds, which means that in the hopefully very unlikely event that the revenues identified by the project and the cash coverage identified by the project and the coverage created by the state credit enhancement and the first-year reserve and the second-year reserve all don't come in, then yes, the county is pledging its full faith and credit to making sure that those bonds are repaid.
And so the debt that the county is taking on, because the county is not a business, right? The county is a public body, and its revenues, its income, the money that belongs to the county originally came from the taxpayers, right?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so what we're suggesting is that the county is going to take on this debt, and we're going to backfill and return the amount of the debt with revenues from this project. And am I correct that all of those revenues are also taxes?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, yes, you are.
Okay, so we're basically utilizing taxpayer dollars to fund the stadium up front and then backfilling and repaying ourselves with more taxpayer dollars, just different revenue streams, but they're still taxpayer dollars, right?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I don't think that's correct. I think what we're doing is we are taking money that is dedicated to this specific project. Once those bonds are paid off, those dollars inure back to the state and to local governments and school districts and the like. In addition to that, there are other revenues that are generated by the project as a result of tourism-related activity that do not inure to repay the bonds. Anything that's generated by a tourist staying in a hotel room and generating room tax, or going to a restaurant and generating retail sales tax, would still go to the state or to local governments or to school districts. Now, you sort of had me until we sort of talked about this concept of backfilling. We're not creating a hole and then backfilling. We're simply taking revenues that do not exist today, dedicating them to the repayment of a bond, and then when that bond is fully paid off, those dollars will continue to be generated and will go to state, local governments, school districts, and the like.
And if I had one more follow-up, just to clarify, that won't be done until the end of the waterfall, right?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I think that you were referring to there is when the waterfall, when we're talking about the waterfall, those are excess revenues that come into the project. And when they go all the way to the bottom of the waterfall, they can be used for three things. One, the early defeasance of the bonds. We can pay the bonds off early. Number two, they can be used for capital that goes into the project. And then there's other things that can sort of be included, like infrastructure that can be utilized for the project. I think what you're referring to is the monies that don't exist today that would go into the project to be used to pay the bonds back. Those are not necessarily the waterfall. What you're saying is that the bonds don't get paid back for 30 years, and so the benefit of that source of revenue doesn't exist for that 30 years. The answer to that question would be yes. The hope is that the benefit from the other project revenues that come from tourism would happen almost immediately and will benefit state, local governments, school districts, and the like.
I'm sorry, I have one more follow-up. And if we're wrong and those revenues are not enough to pay back the bonds, then who's on the hook for paying off the bond?
Senator Scheibel, for the record, Jeremy Aguero.
You're on the hook? No, I'm just kidding.
Sure. Look,
Trying to provide some comic relief.
the answer is, if we get all the way to the very end, it is the full faith and credit of the county that backs those bonds. I don't, they're just like any other general obligation bonds that are issued, that's how it ultimately works. There's a series of sequences that are to provide additional security for those bonds before we ever get there. So if we underestimate the revenue, right, then if we would have had to miss it by, again, one times coverage goes to principal and interest. Another 50% is additional cash coverage. If we miss it by that full 50%, then it would be the state's line of credit that would be used. If we missed it by 100%, that would mean it generated zero revenue. It would go in to the debt service reserve the first year that's issued. If it generated no revenue for the second year, you'd have the state line of credit, and then the second year's reserve would go there. Perhaps the question you're asking is for the longer term. What happens if it generates very little money forever? In which case, well, I suppose we've got a bigger problem. But to that point, once you've burned through all of those credit enhancements and the security that's in place, it would be the full faith and credit of the county that would be required.
Next, we have Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm having a little bit of a deja vu thing in that Mr. Hill, last time I think we had a committee of the whole and you were presenting, it was for Faraday Futures. So on this one, though, it's a little different in that my concern at this point is what's the relationship with Oakland and the A's? I mean, I'm old enough to, I remember Catfish Hunter and Raleigh Fingers and Vita Blue. That's how old I am. What I want to know is how much tax dollars do you know have, in even the last decade, the Oakland community put into this stadium that's now being abandoned by the A's? And the reason I'm asking before you answer is because I'm looking long term. What's the track record here? I want to know if we're making this today, everybody's talking about commitment to the community. What commitment did they make in the past to Oakland that they're now abandoning?
Senator Hansen, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. The analysis I was asked to do was specific to the state of Nevada, so I don't have an answer to that question.
Okay, well then your analysis today showed that we're going to employ 8,000 people in this stadium with a $437 million payroll, with a $1.3 billion economic output. Would it be safe to say that this same annual operation is going to be leaving Oakland and they're going to have a hit of $1.3 billion? I mean, theoretically at least?
Senator Hansen, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I don't know that I can answer that question. Do I believe there's the potential of an economic hit? I do. I think that there's benefit. The other portion that I would suggest is that the structure of their economy very different than the structure of our economy. The trajectory is very different here than there. So I don't know that I could compare the two, but I doubt it would be one-to-one.
Well, I would agree. I'm just kind of looking at it. You guys haven't. What I'm looking at is, okay, why are they leaving Oakland? Okay, there's been a strong relationship there for decades. Now the whole area is apparently going downhill. Mr. Fisher has been criticized for not putting enough dollars back into the stadium or his own team, and now he's going to relocate, and basically the commitment that they had to the community that undoubtedly at one time was strong is going away, and one of the selling points you're presenting to us today is that the Oakland A's are going to come here and be the Las Vegas A's and have a strong commitment to the community. But I have this sensation that they're abandoning a community that they undoubtedly made very similar commitments to in the past. Now, obviously, I apologize because you can't answer those questions because you're only dealing with the the Nevada side of it. But from my perspective as a legislator, I want to see, because if this happens, this is a 30-year tax arrangement and thing. That means somebody, I'll be dead in 30 years more than likely. So, but I want to make sure that the decisions we make today, which will commit us to these tax abatement programs and so forth, are going to be honored down the road, and I'm looking at the track record of the Oakland A's and Mr. Fisher.
Senator Hansen, Steve Hill. Just to be clear, the A's have been in Oakland since the late 60s. They've had a over 50-year run in that city. And obviously the stadium issues that they have had, the Raiders have had, have caused them to look elsewhere and choose Las Vegas. The way this legislation is written, if they leave inside of that 30-year commitment, they have to pay off all the outstanding bonds in order to do so. If they leave, we will have a baseball stadium that in the majority, the A's have paid for, and they will have paid off all the bonds that are outstanding.
Very good, thank you. Let's go to a Nevada question then. I'm sorry, I probably chased you down some areas that you can't answer, but this one I think you can. What's the current unemployment rate in Clark County?
Mayor Hanson, for the record, sub 5%.
Okay, I was just wondering, because in the north, we have a significant labor shortage. You know, in my mind, I'm here to also represent the small business community, and you drive through Carson City, Reno Sparks, about every other business has a help wanted sign. I'm just kind of wondering if we add this additional layer of giant corporation employment, how is that going to impact the current labor shortage in Nevada?
Senator Hanson, obviously this will happen over a period of 5 years before open and play. Part of the way we look at our job at the LVCVA is to help drive demand in order to help drive the community forward. It's hard to time these things. I mean, we all go through ups and downs in economic environment that we're in. But in order to continue economic vitality in any community, you need some level of growth. And this will provide a longer-term level of growth that is reasonable and digestible for the community, but continue it on its upward trajectory.
I got it, and I think it's honestly a great idea overall. My bigger concern, though, is I think in so many cases like this, we have these giant corporations that come in, billionaires that come in, and then we subsidize them through some tax abatement or tax program. And in the meantime, the small business community has to make up the difference for the costs associated with the people that are employed in those things. And I do understand in the long run, it may all balance out if everything works out. But in the short term, in that 10-year window, somebody has to make up the tax revenue that is not being generated, that is going into the actual general funds of various governments. And so that's where I think the small business community basically is being used to subsidize a form of corporate welfare for some exceptionally big people that honestly should be able to finance their own projects without the need of the Nevada taxpayers. But that's just my opinion on that. So thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me this opportunity to ask these questions.
Senator Giannatti.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And, I want to agree with my colleagues on some of their comments on this proposal and the session that we just completed. As you know, many of us have shared our frustration that we just finished a session and now we're back here to consider a tax giveaway for a multi-billionaire without concessions made from the athletics in terms of the ramifications that might occur from such consideration of a proposal. As you may know, the stadium that is proposed and other sites that you have considered is in my district, and I have heard from residents that there is no direct response right now as to how to address the workers that will be displaced from those who are at the Tropicana and the traffic safety concerns that will be further worsened because of this current proposal. And I understand that you documented that, but it still does not show enough progress, at least from my concern. And I don't know if any of you have ever had the chance to drive on Frank Sinatra Drive on a Friday night at 6 p.m., but I sure have because it's my route to home and it's not fun. And it's saddening that we have this proposal, and we had proposals during the session. For instance, I carried a proposal that was going to provide coverage for kids who are undocumented for their cancer treatment. We couldn't even get that done, but now we have a tax giveaway, millions of dollars. And so it's kind of frustrating, at least from my side. Having said that, I do have a few questions that perhaps you guys could answer because I think it's important. And my last question is actually for the leadership of the athletics because I want to hear from them directly. So if the president is here, I would prefer for him to start walking down because I think it's important for the taxpayers to have that question answered. So my first two questions. With regard to the bill proposal, in reviewing Section 20 of the bill, it states that the Board of County Commissioners shall create a resort corridor homeless prevention and assistance fund. Could you help provide background as to why this proposal was accepted? To me, limiting it just to the resort corridor sounds like you're just finding a way to bus homeless folks from the tourist areas and instead ignoring the true root of the problem. And, you know, for me, I personally believe that because my district encompasses the Las Vegas Strip and surrounding areas, I would request that the language adds downtown Las Vegas and surrounding neighborhoods to the section of the bill, because we know that this problem extends beyond the Strip corridor. There are neighborhoods, for instance, down the street from my house near Las Vegas Boulevard and Oakey that could have support services enacted in them. And so I just want to hear your background as to why this was included specifically for the resort corridor.
Senator Donate, Jeremy Aguero. The brief answer to your question, it was originally created because there was a desire to make sure that if the project overperformed, that the community would benefit. I think there was a recognition, a request by Clark County to create such a fund that would capture any of that overperformance by the project, and this is what was here. Perhaps in the drafting, I wasn't very elegant in terms of its design. The idea didn't mean that we're only going to have the money be dedicated to the resort corridor. It simply meant that the dollars were collected in the resort corridor. So to the extent that a clarification relative to that would be helpful to make sure that its intent is clear, I'm more than happy to entertain any revision that would homelessness is not a localized problem. The revenue generated will be localized to that.
Thank you for that. I think the confusion that I had was in Section 20, subsection 3, it says, diminish the incidence of homelessness in and around the Southern Nevada Resort Corridor. And so I just wanted to, as you may know, there are downtown Las Vegas, et cetera, there are areas that feed into it. And for me, it looks like you're just trying to displace individuals, but I think that's something that you should consider when there are amendments to the legislation. And Chair, it's okay, so to just 2 more questions. With consideration of the Sports and Entertainment Improvement District, perhaps I'm reading the legislation wrong, and so if you can correct it for me. Is there a sunset provision on this district, and if there isn't, why haven't you considered such modification?
Senator Donate, Jeremy Aguero. The answer to the question is yes, there is a sunset. It sunsets when the bonds are paid off or 100% of the refundable tax, transferable tax credits are paid back to the state in full, at which time it reduces to about 10% of the amount so that the Stadium Authority Board can continue and oversee the project. It's the same general structure that was utilized in Allegiant Stadium.
Great, thank you. And then I don't know if the leadership of the Oakland A's. Thank you for being here.
Senator, yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. Dave Cavell, President of the A's. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. If you could restate the question, it'd be great.
Sure. So this is my final question. It's directly to you. So on page 39 of your presentation, you listed the tax revenue sources, and there's several tax revenue sources that will be included in the Sports and Entertainment and Improvement District. In one of them, you've listed the live entertainment tax, and that's something that is going to be captured. And so this question is directly to you as the leadership of the Oakland Athletics and your future presence. In the legislation before us, you know, I find it a coincidence that there are funding considerations that will take certain tax percentages away from our county, and that's a problem. Having said that, I believe there's an equity issue that exists in our state, and I want to make sure that I get this from you directly. Given the gaps that we have seen in conversations we've had throughout this session, it is clear that not everyone pays for the live entertainment tax. For example, in my district, which is also where the stadium is going to be located, we have venues like Sand Dollar. It's a local bar that features live bands, and they pay the live entertainment tax. But considerations like yours, athletic stadiums or events, would not have to pay for it. So I want to get this just on the record directly to you. Would you agree that it is important to maintain equity across all businesses and that you will commit to willingly pay for the live entertainment tax for baseball games and athletic events featured at this facility in the near future?
Well, I appreciate the question. You know, obviously, we're bringing the baseball team to Southern Nevada, over $1 billion in private capital. We're looking for a partnership, and we want to make sure that we're going to continue to invest in a variety of ways to improve this situation for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, in a variety of fashions beyond the live entertainment tax. So I think by bringing additional tourists and other ways that generate tax dollars for the community, we think our project can actually be a net positive for the community. plus the quality of life that comes with a baseball team.
Thank you so much for that. But that didn't answer my question. So again, it's a yes or no. Will you willingly commit to pay the live entertainment tax in the near future to fix the equity issue that exists?
Like I said, we are committed to being a great community partner in Southern Nevada and investing, over $1 billion to ensure
That still does not answer the question, sir. I'm asking you directly, yes or no. Will you commit to paying the equity issue that we see existence for the live entertainment tax?
the legislation as it's currently envisioned, does not contemplate that. The project is based on, what is currently proposed. And so we've been focusing on that as really the path forward for the team and for the community.
Thank you. I mean, I find that disingenuous. I asked you directly, you're going to be capturing this as part of your legislation, yet you can't even commit to doing it yourself. And so I think that's something that the taxpayers must know of this state, but I divert my questions for the next round. Thank you.
Welcome.
Next, we have Senator Stone.
Thank you, Madam Leader, and thank you for what I think is a very exciting presentation. But I have a few questions for you. I represented a buyer for this site about 3 years ago, prior to Bally's acquiring the site, so I'm very intimately aware of the value of the site and the underperformance of the site today. So 9 acres of this 35 acres is going to be given. And also, we heard people say, this is just a tax giveaway, it's going to take away from other programs. The taxes they're going to pay, the bonds and everything, it's only coming from this 9 acres as a result of the value that you're putting in there, $1.1 billion, which is more than any other team principal has ever invested in a stadium. Is that correct? In the United States?
Senator Steve Hill, yes, that's correct.
Okay. So, gentlemen, I'm sure that you're aware that we have some mega resorts, very successful ones that people come here, over 40 million people, as you mentioned earlier. I'm looking at examples like the Wynn, the Bellagio, the Venetian. So I would imagine that the owners, the REIT that owns this 35 acres, are giving this 9 acres away, which, by the way, has a value of about $100 million, which I don't know if you've reflected that are going to become part of public ownership. I don't know if you've emphasized that, but that's coming to the taxpayers. But a mega resort is going to be built on that 26 acres. I'll guarantee you that. It's the most wonderful prime location as people are entering, especially from California coming onto the Strip. So my question is, if we have a mega resort that's going to be built, not a matter of if, but when, and I would imagine it's going to happen soon, I would say before 2030, what is the approximate, just give me a range of low to high, of what the Wynn, Bellagio, and Venetian, as an average, contributes to the general fund of the state of Nevada every year? I guess.
Senator Stone, Jeremy Aguero, I don't know that I can give you those specific numbers, but I can tell you that from the analysis that if we look at visitor-related activities and our resort industry generally, it's about 43% of general fund revenues are either directly or indirectly related to our tourism-based economy.
So is it fair to say that if this becomes a mega resort, it's going to add a significant sum of money to the coffers, which you have not contemplated as a part of your economics? Is that correct?
Senator, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, that's correct, sir.
Okay. And then I want to talk about naming rights. Who is going to be the beneficiary of the income from the naming rights? Will that be income that is going to be going to pay off the bonds, et cetera, or is that going to be going to the owner of the team?
Senator Stone, Steve Hill, that would be revenue that would be for
That would be for the A's, okay? And I also want you to talk about bringing a Major League Baseball team to any city. It's my understanding that if we want a team, whether it's the A's or another team, if we have to build a stadium, that it is a Major League Baseball policy that there has to be a public-private partnership. Is that correct?
Senator Stone, Steve Hill, I don't know if that is stated policy of Major League Baseball. At the proposal that we have presented.
Okay. Are you aware of any stadiums that have utilized public funds that have defaulted on their bonds anywhere in this country? I'm talking about major league stadiums.
Senator Stone, Steve Hill, I don't think either.
Thank you. And I think that's a testimonial, thank you, Madam Chair, for the extra time. I think that's a testimonial to the very conservative structure that you've given this with 2 times the reserves. And I don't think Clark County would subject their general fund to much risk. And being an investor myself, there's no such thing as a no-risk investment. But I think that you've done a very good job of minimizing the risk to the taxpayers and the bountiful that can come in response to that. So I think you've answered all of my questions. I appreciate you being here today. I think it's a very exciting project for us to consider. I wish we had a lot more time, but we're a 120-day session, and things happen pretty fast around here. So thank you.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Aguero, Mr. Hill, thank you all so much for being here. I just wanted to start off by thanking Mr. Aguero for answering my questions and providing any supplemental information. I have a couple of questions about the underlying assumption here that we're going to average approximately 27,000 visitors per event. Is that right? Is it 27,000?
Senator Harris, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, it's roughly that amount.
Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of math here. So, pull out your calculator or trust my numbers either way. For those who want to follow along, grab your phone, pull out your calculator. So let's assume that in year 1, the A's are somehow able to double their average attendance to 18,000 for 81 games. That would be 1,458,000 in attendance. In order to meet your projections, we'd have to take the 2.6 million, subtract 1.458. That leaves you with 1,142,000 to be made up by the remaining 14 ticketed events. In order to do that, we take 1,142,000 divided by 14. That would be 81,572 people in attendance for the remaining 14 events. That's more than double the capacity of this proposed stadium. So let me be a bit more generous. Let's assume the average attendance is tripled. That would be 2,187,000 people in attendance. So we take 2.6 million, subtract 2,187,000. That would only leave now 413,000 to be made up by the remaining 14 ticketed events. 413,000 divided by 14 is 29,500 people in attendance. So that would be a required sellout for the remaining 14 events. Is it reasonable to assume that the A's will triple its attendance in years 1, 2, or even 3?
Senator Harris, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I take no issue with the underlying mathematics. If the question is whether the A's build a stadium in Las Vegas and are able to generate attendance in the 50th percentile of all Major League Baseball teams anywhere in the United States, yeah, I think that's reasonable. Those numbers are supported by CSL, the foremost expert in the United States relative to that. They've been reviewed by PFM on behalf of the county, who determined that they were reasonable. So I take no issue with the challenges that exist for Oakland in Oakland today. I think my sense is from all the analysis, that's exactly why they're looking for someone somewhere else to go. That even if they field a tremendous team, getting the support that's necessary just doesn't exist at that point in time. And so by building a new asset, if we look at other facilities that have been constructed, it becomes a draw. You look at what Las Vegas has been able to do in terms of its draw, it's been pretty remarkable overall. And again, you're going to tell me something that I'm sure, because of the conversations that we had before, is that there's no guarantee that they're able to do that. And if we look at recent history, obviously it's challenging. There's no doubt about that. But I think that's the big reason that we're here today.
Yeah, Mr. Aguero, I'm willing to assume that at one day it may be we reach 27,000 visitors. My question is, do we have enough time to reach it in order to make up the average of 27,000 visitors, right? Because if we lag in years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we only have an extra 2,500 seats to be able to make up in perpetuity, right? I mean, depending on how quickly we get there, we never may be able to average 27,500 unless we start in years 1 and 2 pretty close to that number.
Senator Harris, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, you're right. You're 100% right. The other part of it is those first years are probably going to be the years that it's easiest to fill that stadium. It's going to be the shiny new project on the Las Vegas Strip. The ability to sell that place out over those first 3 years, yeah, I like our chances relative to that.
Okay. I'll just throw out one more scenario, and then I have a question about traffic, Chair, if that's okay. So even if we assume that attendance is on average doubled over the first 3 years, that's 18,000 average for 3 years, so 54,000 people. 27,000 times 3 is 81,000. So 81,000 minus 54,000 means we'd have to make up 27,000 more visitors. 27,000 visitors over 3 years is another 9,000 people over the next 3 years. So you'd have to then do 27,000 in the 3 years after that, plus 9,000, 36,000 people, which is beyond the capacity, in order to have an average in the first 6 years.
Senator Harris, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, again, you're starting the math that you're presenting with the estimate that they would be operating in the bottom quartile of Major League Baseball teams. If that's the premise, you're absolutely correct. The analysis that's being done suggests that they will go from where they are today, which for the record is dead last, right, to something that's in the 50th percentile by building an asset, by coming to a different location and giving the team a fighting chance at success.
And I think that's fair, but I also think it's fair for me and fairly generous for me to be assuming that they're going to double their attendance in the first 3 years. But that's I guess, a difference in assumptions, but I felt that that was a fairly generous assumption, and even with that, we've got quite a bit of work to do. Okay. As far as traffic, I know that a lot of folks have been concerned, and my colleague from District 10 mentioned that a bit as well. In this report that I have here prepared by, it looks like, Kimley Horn, there are several recommended infrastructure improvements, including realigning Reno Avenue curved intersection as a major four-way signaled intersection, widening Reno Avenue to provide eastbound and northbound dual left turn lanes, widening Reno Avenue to provide westbound and southbound dual left turn lanes, modifying the median along Las Vegas Boulevard to lengthen southbound to eastbound dual left turn lanes at Reno, installing northbound right turn lanes and a new project access driveway along Las Vegas Boulevard, and approximately 5 or 6 other things that are being suggested to be done to handle the traffic. Has the A's committed to engaging in any of these infrastructure projects?
Senator Harris, Steve Hill. This relates to the high-impact project process that the county goes through. That has to be completed to the county's satisfaction prior to this project moving forward. So that conversation will happen during that period of time.
Okay, I'll try one more time. So has the A's committed to doing what is necessary when it comes to infrastructure, maybe even the recommendations based upon the study that they commissioned, in order to ensure that the traffic is taken care of ahead of this stadium opening?
Senator Harrison, Dave, I'm wrong here, but they have committed to do what it takes to meet that high-impact project plan that will be put in place by the county. County Public Works needs to weigh in on Kimley Horn's study in that conversation, but they have committed to do what they need to do.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Senator Severs-Ganser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So at the beginning of this, we talked about services, and there's all kinds of services that we want for homeless and food insecurity and all sorts of different things. But to be able to cover those services, we need to produce revenue, right? So the state has to drive revenue to be able to pay for services for those in need. And so, you know, in thinking about that, we have to look at the return on investment. And so most recently, we did another project at Allegiant Stadium. Can you talk a little bit about how we've done relative to our expectations and where that money actually goes if we have a net profit or return on investment?
Senator Gansett, Steve Hill. Allegiant Stadium, by virtually any measure, has outperformed what we had projected and what we had hoped. The key number is the number of visitors who, Jeremy describes them, incremental visitors, the ones who come to Las Vegas because of the event in the facility. We projected at the time that about 22% of those visitors, 450,000 visitors a year, would come to Las Vegas because of events in Allegiant Stadium. That number has, in this past year, in 2022, and got to remember, in 2022, in January and February were Omicron months, it's about 180% of what we projected in 2017 or 2016. So it was nearly 800,000 incremental visitors came because that stadium was built. It has been a big part of the recovery from the pandemic for Las Vegas.
Thank you. So almost twice as many people came. And then how many events are you able to do at Allegiant versus the baseball stadium? I mean, including the like the Raiders playing in the stadium and then other events and then baseball because there's so many baseball games and then other events. So what does this look like events to events?
Senator Gansett, Steve Hill. When we did the projection in 2016, we projected 46 events. 10 of those were Raiders games, 6 of those were UNLV games, and there were 30 other events that were projected at the stadium. Number of events at the stadium is approximately that number. We are getting the 10 Raiders games. That includes a couple of exhibition games. Be playing there. What has happened, though, is that the stadium, because it is in Las Vegas and because the stadium's so fantastic, has been a draw for headline events, concerts that we really did not anticipate 7 years ago. We realize it now. We have had, Barcelona, Madrid. That has been the highest generating revenue event at Allegiant Stadium. It has put the eyes of the world on that stadium in our city. BTS sell out 4 stadium concerts in 9 days and 2 hours. 200,000 tickets in 2 hours. Quality and the level of the events that we've had at Allegiant Stadium have far exceeded our expectation and have created that in the city, the environment and the experience around the events created that additional demand that we just didn't realize was there 7 years ago.
So thank you. I think there's a synergy between these stadiums, and part of it is the seasonality. So, well, you never finish with the events. So you have roughly like 46 events there. It's a larger stadium. So what are you thinking, how many events will be driven, including the baseball games themselves at this new stadium? And then talk a little bit about like the draw of the stadium itself, like you just mentioned with Allegiant.
Answered Steve Hill. The projections that we have here are not from the LVCVA. Obviously project 95 events. 82 of those events are the baseball games. They will happen. There are projection for 5 concerts. We think that is very likely low. There are projections for just 3 other sporting events. I will guarantee you that is low. We know of a number of events that if we had that stadium now, we could put in there, and they would number quite a few more than 3. And then there are 5 ticketed community events. I would add that our trade show customers at the convention center and also the convention centers at Venetian and Mandalay are always looking for a different experience. A surprising number of them have corporate events at Allegiant Stadium now, are looking for other venues to have keynote speeches. Many of these large corporations will bring 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people to town for one of their conventions. Finding a place for a keynote address, just a different type of experience will be an attraction that has not been considered in the.
Thank you. And so when you look at, again, you're looking at incremental visitors, and so when you look at baseball games, it's off-season. And when we were in revenue, in finance, I asked a little bit about that, like how are we going to move our capacity, or maybe it's it's just the opposite. So our occupancy rates, right? So we've got some vacancies, our occupancy rates, if we move those, what does that look like? How does that affect the bottom line, like the return on investment for the state?
Senator Gansert, the demand in months that baseball plays is oftentimes less than what you will see other times of the year. Now, how that typically manifests itself is in a drop in room rates. Properties do a good job of keeping occupancy generally. Our current occupancy is less than what it was in 2019. We have an additional rooms coming online. And as I mentioned earlier, a part of our job, or a big part of our job, is to drive demand in order to allow the city to continue.
Right. So I appreciate that. And originally I was talking about return on investment. So you've got some numbers there. So, like, what are the expectations as far as the tax dollars we will receive? Because when we look at abatements, it's really just about the 9 acres. Those are abated, but then we're making money elsewhere because we're going to have incremental rooms and meals and all sorts of different things. So I know you've got some numbers, but like return on investment, what do we expect to get above and beyond what the state's investing? And when you look at what the state's investing, because there's a payback model, the net to the state is like $90 million. So we're talking about a $1.5 billion stadium with probably a $200 million worth of land. So like $1.7 billion, including sort of the in-kind that's been happening here. So what do you think about the return on investment to be able to pay for services that we talked about? Like, how is this going to help people in the community directly because of revenue? And then I know there's a community benefits plan as well, which is to the side. But I'm saying there's like sheer dollars coming to our state because of what it's driving throughout that area.
Answered Steve Hill. You bring up a good point. A good portion of the bill is really a loan and not a permanent commitment. So the county will be loaning the A's $120 million and will be paid back. The state would be offering $180 million in transferable tax credits, but half of those would be paid back. So the $90 million, and then the county has committed $25 million credit in that HIP process, that development agreement, and that would be a permanent commitment on behalf of the county. So it is that $115 million is the only permanent commitment. Now, the math that Mr. Aguero has done is based on the entire amount, whether it is a loan to be paid back or not. And we are going to receive, the state and local governments will receive in tax dollars 3 times as much as that total.
So 3 times as much. And when I think about the revenues of the state, the 3 top revenues are sales tax, gaming, and modified business tax, right? And those taxes, where do those get distributed? Are those just to Clark County, or do those get distributed across the state, whether it be rural? I mean, do they all, a lot of them go to the general fund, right? So what does that look like as far as who will benefit locally and then potentially otherwise in the state, given sales, gaming, and MBT are the drivers?
Turn it over to Mr. Aguero.
Senator Ganser, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, you're absolutely right. If you look at sales, gaming, and MBT, the sales tax, the state sales tax, inures to the benefit of the state's general fund, right? So the incremental revenue that Mr. Hill talked about goes into the state's general fund. It will benefit everywhere in the state. The next one is the local school support tax, the LSST, as we refer to it. It goes into the state education fund. It will go to every district in the state of Nevada. Again, incremental revenues that will go there. We have the BCCRT in the SCCRT, the basic city-county relief tax, and the supplemental city-county relief tax. Some of those dollars are redistributed through the two-tier consolidated tax redistribution system. Others of them are not, but while it'd be modest, there would certainly be a redistribution. To your point, the gaming tax, 100% of that inures to the benefit of the state's general fund, so those dollars would come to this legislature and be distributed throughout the entirety of the state of Nevada. And the same thing is true with our payroll tax, the modified business tax. 100% of that inures to the benefit of the state's general fund, so those dollars will benefit the entire state.
Thank you. And if I heard that correctly, so we're expecting like a 3 times return on investment for this. We have the experience of the Allegiant Stadium where we have almost twice the visitation, the incremental visitation that as we expected. And when you think about Las Vegas, in my mind, when I think about the Raiders, the Knights, now we've got F1, I think this is another piece that makes it sort of the ultimate professional team, sports destination. And so, since you're the head of the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, do you think there's a draw for just that? And the last thing I'll say is, when I think about baseball versus a lot of other sports, it's affordable. Families get to go. When you think about the local families or like a school, they can go to events like this. So it's this big destination that, and Las Vegas is really an international destination. If you ever say you're from Nevada, they always say Las Vegas. They don't say Reno. They say Las Vegas. Sometimes people know Tahoe, but like the driver of it really increasing in a very positive way, the visibility and the attraction of Las Vegas. And then in a local way, families can go to these games. They can afford these games. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that. Thank you.
Senator Gansert, Steve Hill. There are a number of benefits that are harder to quantify that are not in these numbers. The reputation of Las Vegas as, a city who can figure out how to say yes, who can make these things happen, that matters. The message that it sends when these professional sports leagues choose our city. It highlights the city. We get better marketing from having these events, these teams, than we could ever possibly afford to buy. That value is not in the numbers either. And the momentum that we have in becoming the sports and entertainment capital of the world, this is another huge step, more energy in creating that image, that environment, that reality. And we are separating ourselves from other cities so that this can become more permanent, more stable, and we think that's important as well.
Just to answer too, that like family, like affordability, the average ticket versus maybe some of the other sporting events we have, if you don't mind just commenting on that. Thank you.
Senator Gansert, Steve Hill. Certainly, and we will have 81 baseball games a year, plus playoff games. That allows approximately 2.5 million, maybe a little more seats per year to be available. Seats at this stadium, there will be seats available in the stadium in the $15 range, which is just not possible for others. I mean, it's the comparison's just different. There are fewer seats, or there are many fewer games in other leagues, and so it makes it a family event that's very affordable.
Thank you. I appreciate all the information.
Thank you. Senator Daley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the comments, questions, and various things from my colleagues in, I think, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, and 11, and they all have their questions and perspective, and I rely on some of their expertise back and forth. So I'll go to a question that I'm a blue-collar guy. I have a couple of different things on that. And my understanding is that there's a private sector between the A's and the construction trades pre-hire agreement for this particular project. Is that correct?
Senator Daley, Steve Hill. Yes, the A's have reached an agreement for a project labor agreement for the construction of this site, and they have reached an agreement with the culinary for the operation of the stadium.
And then I had a follow-up question on a question was asked by my friend from District 11, I believe it is, regarding the peripheral work, the road work and various things they need to do to accommodate that. And there's a principle in development called concurrence. So if you're having a project that then has impacts, they have to mitigate those impacts in concurrence with the project opening. And you indicated that they were committed to do whatever it is they're going to do. So my question is, partly, is the county paying for that? The city? Is the owners of the A's going to put in part of the cost for some of those projects and various things? Is that going to be covered by some of the things in this agreement, either the project agreement or the community, the local business purposes, et cetera, small local businesses? Is all that going to be covered? Or is that separate and just goes from there? And I would hope that at least those parts of the public projects would not be excluded from the bidding provisions that you have here. I'm just curious how that all meshes together.
Senator Daley, Steve Hill. I would imagine, I know any public work project is going to go through the entire process. That's not addressed or changed by this bill. The conversation will happen between the A's and Clark County, and you're right, they will be required to mitigate all of the concerns or impacts, really, that the stadium causes in that area. The county has agreed to a $25 million credit on the cost of that mitigation. But that cost is not reflected in the $1.5 billion number and will, other than that $25 million, be borne by the A's.
And thank you for that. I just so following up on the other blue collar question on some of what I have in the small local business portion of this, which I support. I think it's a good idea. But I don't believe there was any intention in this piece of legislation to conflict potentially with the private agreement between the A's and the building trades on some of that stuff. And specifically in Section 26, I think you need to put a definition. I've seen some of these programs and various things before where people, think they're special. I have to meet this 15%. So you would have some of these people that meet the qualifications otherwise say, I'm not signing any agreement in order to participate on this job. I'm special. And some of your language in here, especially I think in subsection 4, where it, I think it's on page 16, where it says, such contractor, subcontractor, such work shall not impose any requirements on the small local business relating to the employees selected by the small local businesses to perform such subcontracted work. Now, if they have a provision in the pre-hire agreement that that gives waivers and various things, then that was their business. That's what they did. But to put in statute that would potentially conflict with that and go against a negotiated agreement, I think is a concern for me, among others. And like I say, I appreciate the other questions. I don't know as much about taxes as my colleague in 4 and my colleagues here in 2 and 10. We're plugged into some of those community-based issues, and I rely on them for those things. And I think some of them rely on me for these questions. So if you can give me an explanation there.
Sure. Senator Daley, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. That language is the parallel language that was utilized in the Allegiant Stadium project, which exceeded the small business threshold, employed 168 small businesses as a result of that language being included, and generated just under $300 million in revenues for Nevada-based small businesses. That's why it was carried over here, and we would expect something similar.
Yeah, and there were no issues with somebody not wanting to sign the letter of assent that said they'd follow the agreement. I've just experienced some of those issues in the past in similar situations.
Give my interruption, Senator. For the record, Jeremy Aguero, I'm not aware of any, and none surfaced on the other project that I was aware of.
Final question, Madam Chair, if I can. I know you mentioned some of the infrastructure and stuff, and you mentioned the boring company. I'm perfectly fine picking a fight with Mr. Musk if he wants to, attack me on Twitter. I suppose he could. But does he think he's special and that his boring company wouldn't have to comply with some of these requirements related to this project? I hope he doesn't think so, because he's not.
Senator Daley, there is no public money going into the Las Vegas Loop, but the boring companies made a commitment to Clark County that other than the one machine that they run as research and development, that with their own employees, they will use union labor throughout that system.
Senator Don Darrowloop.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On slide 38 of your presentation, I noticed that there is a one-time construction fiscal impact of, I think, 38.8 million based on the estimated sales tax. So how, both of these revenue sources will be pledged to paying off the county bonds, but will the state and local governments, and specifically school districts, see any tax revenue associated with the stadium construction, or will it all be pledged to bond replacement?
Senator Don Darrowloop, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. During the construction, all of those dollars would be utilized for the creation of the repayment of the bonds and the creation of the reserves that we talked about before. Because there's no operations that are occurring, there would be no other revenue that would inure to state, local governments, or school districts.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to understand, this isn't, necessarily always my wheelhouse, but so then after the bonds are repaid and 50% of those tax credits are repaid, and 10% of all the tax revenue generated, is that right, to the Sports and Entertainment Improvement District? Will that go to the stadium in perpetuity, or how does that work?
Senator Don Darrowloop, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I just want to make sure that we're saying the same thing for a moment. There are really three phases of the project, right? There's the early phase of the project before the bonds are issued. There's the point at which the bonds are issued, the stadium is constructed and operated, and then there's a period after the bonds have been paid off and all the transferable tax credits that are to be refunded have been fully refunded. During the first chunk of that project, if any revenues are generated as a result of that, it goes into a tax account and would reduce the amount of the bonds, right? So again, if the project isn't constructed, there's no revenues. Because the project's being constructed, those dollars go in to that account. For the, let's call it a 30-year period in which the stadium operates and the bonds are being paid off, those revenues are all coming in. They are being used to pay off the bonds, and hopefully there's waterfall revenues that flow all the way through that. And then we've got these other revenues that we've talked about associated with visitors and something along those lines. I believe what you're talking about is that third tranche. What happens after the bonds are paid off? What happens after all the transferable tax credits are paid off? At that point, 90% of the project, 90% of the revenues go back to the state, local government, school district, anyone else is imposing the tax just like they would if the stadium never existed. The last 10% goes for really three things. One is the operations of the Stadium Authority Board, who still has responsibilities over the stadium. The second, it would be infrastructure in and around the stadium project. And the third would be for capital reinvestment to hopefully maintain the standard of the stadium beyond its 30-year useful life.
Okay, I think I understand that. So another question I had was in section 29, and several of the taxes that were pledged towards repaying those county bonds have never previously been authorized in law to be pledged as contemplated in the bill. And I apologize if you've answered this, but I just need some clarification. So it includes that modified business tax and the insurance premium tax. Since the revenue collected from these taxes inside the Sports and Entertainment Improvement District would need to be accounted for separately, from other revenue collected, have you considered the administrative impact that this might have on the taxpayers in the Department of Taxation?
Senator Dondero Loop, Jeremy Aguero for the record. Yes, we've had the conversations with the Department of Taxation in terms of how they would need to be separated to be accounted for. There are two provisions within the same section. One that essentially says state and local governments will create commercially reasonable ways in which the reporting onus is on the taxpayer to make sure that they're captured. So we believe that's a reasonable way to do it. You mentioned the modified business tax, a business that operates both in and out of the stadium. District would merely have to file some sort of addendum that says this is the portion of my taxes that are inside there. You mentioned also the insurance premium taxes. You'll notice that within the legislation as drafted, that it talks about taxes that are paid directly or passed through. To the extent that the insurance premium tax is passed through to the team or the stadium operator or something along those lines, they'll be recaptured, put into that account. The second question that you ask is really about the taxpayer themselves and not creating something that's onerous. There's no doubt that there's another layer of compliance, but it's also what makes the project work. We had the opportunity to talk to the A's about, some of the major structure. There's really a handful of major companies, a master concessionaire that operates all the concessions, a master operator of the stadium itself, and those two feel like their ability to comply would be reasonable in terms of being able to get that done.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for being here.
Senator Ornshaw.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of questions, Mr. Hill, Mr. Aguero. Thanks for presenting this. When we heard the bill on the Allegiant Stadium, it was a different world. We hadn't had the pandemic. We hadn't had COVID. I don't think any of us expected anything like this to happen. And I'm going back looking at some old headlines, and I'm looking at a headline from about 2 years ago in the Review Journal, County taps reserve fund to make Allegiant Stadium bond payment. And it talks about how, I think, over 2 months, there was over $23 million tapped from the stadium reserve account to try to make those payments. And of course, I hope that we'll never have something like COVID again or another pandemic, but if this bill passes and bonds are issued for this stadium, and then we still have the bonds for the Allegiant Stadium, and something happens where people can't travel for 12 months or 18 months, what do you think that will do to the fiscal stability of the county?
Senator Ornshaw, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. I'm glad you asked the question. I think what happened during the pandemic, as difficult as it was, is a great example of exactly how the system should work. The reserves were set aside at the point at which those bonds were issued, a full year. A second year was funded through the operations and continues to be generated. Yes, State of Nevada, Clark County, had to tap into those reserves to make sure that the principal and interest on those bonds could be repaid. And today, as we sit here, not only have we rebounded from the pandemic, but both the first year and the second year reserves are almost back to 100% funding from where they were before. The existence of the coverage, the existence of 2 years reserves is a remarkably conservative structure that's out there. Now, you asked a question that sort of had two parts. One, what about the scenario that we're structuring here? What would have happened under the same set of scenarios? And then what happens if they both were to occur concurrently? What sort of happens to us in that particular case? As I mentioned during my opening comments, because of the 2-year reserves and because of the backstop that is provided to this by the state, which is essentially a half year's reserve, we would have to generate zero revenue for 4 years before we would have that problem. I would respectfully submit, if we have zero revenue for 4 years, we've got a much bigger problem than not filling a stadium in the state of Nevada, something that would be on an order much larger than the pandemic we just dealt with. It does have other risks relative to this. One's a room tax, the other one is tax increment. I don't shy away from those type of questions, but we're also talking about 2 times coverage, where under Allegiant Stadium it was only 1.5 times coverage, and there's an accelerated revenue generating the second set of bonds. Beyond that, you asked the question about whether, if it happened concurrently, whether we'd sort of create a compounding issue associated with it. We have another pandemic. Now we have Allegiant Stadium that perhaps doesn't have folks in it, and we have an A's stadium that doesn't have folks in it. They have separate and distinct funding structures. There is no crossover between the two. Both of them are structured with independent revenue streams and independent sets of security overall. Beyond that, sort of asked, I think, maybe even a broader question that I think Mr. Hill was talking about, and that is really, what is the aggregate amount of the debt that the county is taking on here relative to that? Well, the county's debt that they're taking on, exclusive of the line of credit, the credit enhancement that is created by the state, is about $95 million overall. That's a lot of money to most of us, and I don't want to suggest that it's not a huge amount of funds, and I would hope that that is never put at risk for all the reasons that I said before. But if by a horrible set of circumstances, the county was required to utilize its general fund or its authority to pay that off, the financial stability of Clark County could certainly weather a $90 million hit. And again, I only say that as what would be an apocalyptic sort of scenario for us as a community. But you asked the question, so I wanted to take you to sort of what I think is the finality of that scenario.
Thank you, Mr. Aguero. And Chair, may I have one extra question? Thank you. Some of my colleagues have asked about the traffic situation and the challenges that intersection has with the I-15, the construction, and when big events happen. Has Nevada Department of Transportation been consulted about, what additional traffic challenges and problems need to be solved if this bill passes and if we start construction on that stadium? Because I know that in the conversation on the Allegiant Stadium, it seemed like they were here, and there was a lot of conversation about what the plans they had and being able to handle the traffic going to the football stadium. And I just wonder if they're part of this.
Senator Orenshall, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I remember those conversations, right? There was a lot. We talked a lot about parking and transportation and all those things. But let's recall that when we talked about Allegiant Stadium here, they didn't have a site, right? We didn't know where they were going to be located when that took place. So a lot of those were sort of in the context of building something as large as a 60,000 seat stadium, 65,000 seat stadium. The context of those conversations are exactly why the legislation that's presented to you today is structured the way that it is. It actually requires that the developer of the stadium go to Clark County and enter into a high-impact project agreement that contemplates transportation, utilities, air traffic, all of those things, because they're not settled today. We don't have all of those answers. More directly to the question that you're asking, the Nevada Department of Transportation is also reflected in the bill as drafted and requires that if there are infrastructure requirements that NDOT identifies as being something that needs to be mitigated, that the A's, the developer in this case, have an affirmative obligation to work not only with the local government, but also work with NDOT to mitigate those infrastructure impacts on the community.
Thank you, Mr. Aguero. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to ask some questions that are probably a little bit more elementary than some of my learned colleagues. So we talk about jobs, and if this bill goes through, then the Tropicana will be no more, yes?
Senator Spearman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, yes.
And so the jobs at the stadium, I think you said some of them are full-time, some are part-time. Do you have a percentage of those jobs that are part-time?
Senator Spearman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I don't have a perfect estimate, but the way a stadium is structured, I would guess the majority of those jobs would be part-time jobs.
So maybe 80%?
I think that feels a little high to me, Senator Spearman.
60?
Yeah, okay. I would certainly defer to that, sure.
Okay. So what is the salary? What would be the salary of the part-time employees?
Senator Spearman, Steve Hill. Start with a majority of those employees, many of those employees will be represented by the Culinary Union. The A's have agreed to that. The concession employees, we have them at the convention center. We have hundreds, up to 1,000 when we have a big trade show in, and then the trade show moves out and they move someplace else. And so those concession jobs are very mobile. It's even more portable than construction jobs are. So what having the stadium will do for all of those people who are going to be represented by the culinary and have all the pay and benefit that the culinary has negotiated on their behalf, they will have a more year-round set of opportunities to move from to improve their job situation.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that the level of pay that the employees are currently at the Tropicana, I'm trying to make sure that there's parity once they lose their job. And let me say this. One of the things that concerns me is the rapidity of innovation that is taking place. And so the culinary does a great job representing, its members. But I need to talk on the real, okay? If someone is at, and I don't know if they're $25 an hour, how long would it take them with a stadium job to get back to that level?
Senator Spearman, the question you're asking is how long they would have to go through the step process in order to do that?
No, if you can calculate the hourly pay, that's what I'm trying to get at, the hourly pay. So someone today is making $25 an hour. The bulldozer comes in, next week, that's gone. How long will it take that person to get back to $25 an hour with the stadium jobs? Because that's a lot of what we've talked about here. So how long would it take them to get to parity?
Senator Spearman, Steve Hill, there's going to be a good amount of time between the time that the Tropicana is demolished and the time operating jobs are available on the site. And while there may be an open invitation for folks who have worked on that site to come back and work at the stadium, there's real demand for that workforce in the resort corridor now, including at the convention center. So my sense is that they would move quickly to another job doing what they're doing now, rather than have to wait for 4 years and rebuild that at the stadium.
So that's another assumption that we should probably include in here, because all of them may not move immediately into a job that is equal to the one that they just left. So number two, Madam Chair, is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So the projections for construction jobs at Allegiant Stadium were 11,000. And I remember us talking about shiny new objects, I think it was with Faraday. But the project only produced 900 construction jobs in each year of construction, so 2,700 jobs.
Senator Spearman, for the record, Jeremy Aguero. Again, we're talking about person years of employment, and we're talking about direct, indirect, and induced employment overall. And I would suggest that if you look at the number of individuals that were employed in terms of Allegiant Stadium, I think there were a substantial. If you look at the number of suppliers that supported that project that may not have been part of their direct payroll, they were substantial. If you look at the amount of wages and salaries that were paid on that project and the average hourly wage that was paid on that project and what the ripple effects were associated with that, it was substantial. I know that there's been questions relative to the total number of employees and those type of things. Again, it's very difficult to measure those indirect and those induced impacts because there's no way for me to understand how many doctors or folks that are working at restaurants or grocery stores that have a job as a result of someone's secondary spending as a result of they got a paycheck. The way that the construction estimates are generated is based on the total amount of payroll that is associated with the project and what our average wage is in the community. And I would suggest both of those support both Allegiant Stadium and this project will have a very significant impact on our construction workforce.
Thank you for that. And my questions are hypothetical because what we're dealing with here is hypothetical. The third one is on the 2022 LVCVA visitor profile, it shows that people said they visited Las Vegas for sporting events at about 3%. And let me pull that up because there were other things, I think it's like 44%, for visiting relatives and friends, 12%, gambling, 6%, social event, 6%, corporate meetings, 5%, sporting events, 3%, passing through, 3%, other business, 3%. And so to the point that my colleague from Senate District 11 was making, if this was just last year on LVCVA's profile, 3% of the people said they visited, most of the people, 3% of them said they visited to attend a sporting event. Now please understand, as we're flushing this out, because the people that we represent don't expect us to come here and rubber stamp. And so we have to have answers to this, because right now the only thing we're talking about are what ifs or assumptions. Granted, there may be some type of actuarial table that was constructed to get to this, but we're talking about the reality now. So please talk to me about how we get to stadium attendance, 2.6 million, average annual using per event estimates. And again, estimates, unless it changed in the last couple of days, estimates is another way of saying assumptions.
Senator Spearman, Steve Hill. The number that I think you're referring to is the number of incremental visitors that are in attendance at events. So they're saying that's the reason they came to Las Vegas, and there's a variety of potential reasons that they could reply to there. So that's simply reflective of the 405,000 person number, visitor number that Mr. Aguero has cited, not the 2.6 million total potential seats that are available for all the events at the stadium.
Madam President, so while you all were talking, I'm getting some text from constituents. Said he keeps using waterfall. What does that mean?
Senator Spearman, Steve Hill. So as Mr. Guerrero said, we've projected use half of the revenue that will be created in this district to pay back the bonds. The other half of the revenue is directed in this legislation to go for specific uses, and those specific uses, kind of in order, are kind of seen as what happens when the money flows over the cliff into other directed uses. So it's generally the term that's used for the excess revenue that's generated that is not necessary to pay the bonds.
The other question that I got was explain transferable tax credit and do it in an elementary level.
Senator Spearman, Steve Hill. Transferable tax credit is basically the state writing a check.
Writing a check? Who's writing the check?
To the A's, to anyone else that is the beneficiary of the tax credit itself. The transferable part of that, so I was trying to be a little too elementary. The state issues a certificate that says the holder of this certificate does not have to pay one of these taxes. If you issued that certificate to the A's and they were paying those taxes, they could offset their own tax expense with that certificate. If they are unable or don't pay enough tax to get to for example, the 36 million that's requested in this legislation, they would have to sell that to someone else in order to receive the money that's the value of that certificate.
So this is my last question. Reading from a letter that Representative Barbara Lee posted today, I write regarding the future of the Oakland Athletics Baseball Club in the East Bay. Many of my constituents in the East Bay and I are increasingly frustrated with the coming apparent failure of the team and Major League Baseball to deal in good faith. Let me jump down to the third paragraph because I think someone asked this. I believe strongly that our community also provides value to the A's. Oakland has been the site for this franchise for a great deal of time. And then she goes on to say about some things that they had already started doing in preparation, some things that the Oakland A's asked for, and they were in the process of doing that. But now the frustration is coming because they're seeking a new location. So that's part one. But the other one would be, we've heard from someone about the community benefit, but as I look at this, I think the players are very close to the bottom of the pay scale. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I looked at it wrong, but that would be it. And when we talked about, and I can't remember who it was, asked, what is the investment? And right now, if you're asking us to give this much money, there has to be some awareness on the part of the owner and any other interested financial partners who have that fiduciary responsibility. There has to be some awareness of what the commitment, the dollar amount commitment is. Because absent that, the only thing we continue to talk about are just hyperboles. And so, as my colleague to my right said, we hope not to go to another pandemic. But the what ifs. And if we can't, if those payments can't be met and they fall back on the county, if that happens, then we're left, with the shrugging of the shoulders. Well, I don't know what happened. And so my questions, and I believe that the questions of my colleagues are really designed to say, we have to do our due diligence because this is a lot of money. And the community benefits really don't make up for the lack of money for youth mental health. Now, we passed a lottery that's going to come back again next year, but it's going to be like 6 years before that actually takes place. The now, the here and the now. We don't have the money to increase access, not just access, affordable access, but quality access in our healthcare delivery system. We don't have the money right now to put towards eliminating or at least mitigating homelessness. I have a bill that was about women veterans being housed and women who are coming out of domestic violence situations, formerly incarcerated women, and women who are 50 plus, housing insecure. We don't have money for any of that. And we just closed out the session, so it's going to be another 18 months unless we get called back for a third session, special session. So it's going to be that long. And so my concern, and I will tell you with all honesty, my concern and my hesitation is based upon the lack of certainty, because those things that we could not do because we don't have the money, but we come 2 days after special session ends, this session ends with a special session, but now we have the money, but we didn't have the money for mental health. We didn't have the money for hospitals. We didn't have the money for homeless to really address homelessness. And $5 million to me is a lot of money, but that's just because I've never had $5 million. But when in the grand scheme of things, and you look at how homelessness has become more and more pervasive, and part of that is because affordable housing does not exist. $5 million towards that problem, towards that challenge, is probably like saying, can you buy me a Coke? And so we would really have to look at it through the lens of how pervasive is the problem, and if we're going to be a good community partner, how do we come up from $5 million so that it really, really, really addresses the problem? Because see, if we don't do these tax credits, that means that there's going to be money that we can do some other things with. And as far as the transferable tax credits, that for me, if we give that to you, but then you can transfer, you can sell it to someone else. Here we go again, because now you're talking about tax dollars that are here and now, but they're not going to be, and in the future sometime, maybe they will be again. Does that make sense to you? So I'm just trying to, these are questions from people who text me but there are also questions that I've been trying to figure out in my head. And so I will tell you the transferable tax credits are a problem for me.
Senator Spearman, Steve Hill. Just to be clear, the process of redeeming those tax credits does not ever create any additional cost to state or local government. It's the original amount. That's all the cost that there will be, regardless of how they are then ultimately redeemed in the future. I will say there's certain, the uncertainty is real, but has also been taken into consideration in a number of ways. So as we look at the bonds, the 2 times coverage, as we look at the return on investment at 3 times what the entire amount, including what is just being lent and will be repaid, there's going to be a positive benefit here. The state and local governments and the A's interests are aligned. They want to be successful too. It is why they are looking to move. It is the situation in Oakland is also a part of the issue that has to be overcome. When they have been good very recently, and when they were good, attendance was not great. The experience that we will provide in Las Vegas, both at the ballpark and around the ballpark, will be a draw that will help the team have the opportunity to be more successful in the future.
Senator Pizzina.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Mr. Aguero, Mr. Hill, for the presentation. To piggyback a little bit off of my colleague from Senate District 11's question in regards to filling the seat and realizing tax revenues, I come from the trade show industry, Mr. Hill, as I know you do too, at the LVCVA, and we look at a CES which brings in 115,000 attendees on average. ConAg, ConExpo just left in March, I think nearly 140,000. So I guess one of my questions would be, will the LVCVA be actively pursuing the convention and trade show sector to fill those seats at A's games?
Senator Pizzina, Steve Hill. The answer to that is absolutely yes. And it's not simply the trade show industry and the corporate meeting industry, but our sports department will also be working with the stadium to fill the stadium.
And what percentage of seats, and I'm just curious, in estimation would be filled by visitors versus locals?
Senator Pizzina, Steve Hill. The general projection is that about 30%, maybe a little less than 30% of the attendees would be visitors, and then just that 16% of the attendees would be those incremental visitors. And that's the basis for the entire calculation about the benefit to state and local government, just those 16%. And excuse me, but just to put that in a little more perspective, if I could, the 405,000 people, just for 81 baseball games, is just 5,000 people per game that have come to Las Vegas to attend just the baseball game portion of what's been projected. Those are the people who are going to provide 100% of the statewide and fiscal benefit that Mr. Aguero has projected.
Thank you so much. And, I guess, and you've already touched on this briefly, but, the last thing I would comment on is just the importance of the LVCVA and the resort partners looking at special events at the stadium in order to realize some of the revenues that are going to need to come when it comes to those corporate events, when it comes to trade shows and conventions, because those are huge for generating revenue and hopefully, not really looking so much at bringing in other sporting events, but other events that come up from trade shows, conventions, corporate events, and ensuring that they make sure the stadium is a venue for those events as well.
Thank you, Senator Steve Hill. When I opened, I said that we, broad we, including the resort partners. But at the LVCVA, when I talked about I'm going to personally work to make sure that you feel like the decision you make here today was a good one and was time well spent. We are going to be an aggressive partner in helping make this a successful project.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to talk to you. I felt like I was in finance when you did your big hearing, so I don't feel like I need to go over all those questions again, so I'm going to ask something completely different. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Stadium Board. And I know that you made an amendment to put legislative appointments on the Stadium Authority, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what the roles and responsibilities might be.
Senator Lang, Steve Hill. We have had that conversation. That amendment is not reflected in this document. It is a decision that this body would need to make.
Thank you. And what would their roles and responsibilities be? What is that board? What's their responsibilities, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Senator Lang, Steve Hill. Generally, the responsibility of the Stadium Authority is to make sure that the state and local governments get the benefit of the agreement that is in law and in all of the development agreement, lease agreements, non-relocation agreements, and to make sure that that actually happens. It's a relatively heavy lift early in the project because you have to negotiate the development agreement and the lease and all of the other documents that it takes in order for this project to move forward. We have to determine that the estimates on the revenue are actually there before we can, all of those things have to happen before we can go to Clark County and ask them to issue the bonds. Then there is the responsibility of making sure that the stadium is maintained, that it is being run appropriately. So we oversee that. Frankly, the Raiders have done a fantastic job of running Allegiant Stadium. It's been highly successful, and right now our job is not very difficult. The stadium's very new, so the maintenance that is required has been pretty minimal. There also has not been any money in the waterfall until just recently to contribute to that maintenance. We will be responsible for overseeing the maintenance of the stadium moving forward, and that is kind of a summary of the responsibility of the Stadium Authority.
Senator Krasner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much, Mr. Hill and Mr. Aguero, for your in-depth presentation. This does sound like an exciting opportunity for Nevada. And I did have the opportunity to meet and talk with the A's owner, Mr. Fisher. He seems like a fine man and a person of high integrity. And the jobs, 14,639 jobs for construction of the stadium, and then 8,010 jobs for annual operations of the stadium. And then the visitors that will come to Nevada to watch baseball games from every state, because they're going to play every team from every state. And the fact that it's affordable to families, that was a question I asked him, because some of the sports in Nevada are not affordable to a family of four. And he assured me there would be stadium seats and that a family of four could afford to go to these baseball games and buy their kids a hot dog and a soda, maybe some popcorn. And so those things are all very attractive to the state. But just in the last few days, I have received numerous emails from the people that live in Nevada, the people that live in my district. And so my question is there any possibility that the people could possibly receive an increase in their property taxes? Homeowners could receive an increase in their taxes on their property, or Nevada citizens generally could receive a tax increase? Thank you.
Senator Krasner, Steve Hill, Mr. Aguero can correct me if I'm wrong, but no, I don't believe that that would be the case at all.
Under any scenario, that would not be the case?
Senator Krasner, if as Mr. Aguero described, the Armageddon scenario that talked about where the county would actually have to backstop the bonds, there's, by the way, the payments on that $95 million, $120 million bond is about a 15th of that. So it's $9 million when we start, something along those lines, a year. So it might have some minor impact somewhere, but other than that, I don't think so.
Senator Krasner, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, I think that the question that you're ultimately getting at is if the county had to use its full faith and credit, could it potentially utilize ad valorem property tax to offset the cost? I suppose so. But as Mr. Hill said, that's a pretty unlikely scenario given the order of magnitude of what we're talking about here and where you'd ultimately have to get to. The county pledges its full faith and credit and all the revenues that it has available to make that. While the options that underlie the full faith and credit of the county are significant, again, you're talking about a scenario that would not only be highly unlikely, but would also require a highly unlikely choice by the county to utilize such.
Thank you.
Okay, members, I think at this point we may need just a little bit of a recess for folks to use the restroom and maybe for you all who are presenting to be able to do that or get a drink of water. So we are going to be in a recess for probably at least 20 minutes or so folks can get up, walk around, use the restroom, get a drink. I know, me too. And so the committee will be in a brief recess.